Good evening. Sorry for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties. A quorum of the City Council being present, I call tonight's meeting to order. If we could please stand, if willing and able, to salute the flag and pause for a moment of silence. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if during our moment of silence, if we could remember our community member, Paula Shiraga, who tragically passed away in a bicycle crash in Boston.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's meeting is being recorded with audio and visual devices. There are also listening hearing aids available for anyone who might need them. On a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to accept submission of the minutes for the regular City Council meeting of January 28th, 2019. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to public comment. Public comment is the time in our meeting when the public can speak for 3 minutes on any issue that is on tonight's agenda, with the exception of communications and awaiting reports. When your name is called, you'll see to your left there's a screen. It'll tell you who the speaker is, as well as who the next speaker is, as well as count down your time. When your name is called, please come to the podium, state your name, your address, and the issue that you're speaking on. At the beginning of your comments, there is a table with a basket. If your comments are written, we would love it if you would leave your written comments in the basket. It makes it easier for our clerk. If your comments are in electronic form, there are business cards on the table as well. If you email them to the clerk before midnight tonight, they will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. If after midnight tonight, they will be included in the minutes of a subsequent meeting. We ask that folks please direct all comments to the chair and not to individual councilors. We also ask that folks in the audience please refrain from clapping, snapping, booing, or anything else that comments on a speaker's, what a speaker is talking about or commenting on. If you are the one person in the audience that has an opinion different from everyone else, we do not want you to feel intimidated or disrespected in the chamber. I think, I always forget something, but I think that's it. I did mention audio devices. All right. So the first is Kathy Zuzzi, followed by Kenneth Carson.
Good evening. Hello, City Councilors. Thanks for letting me speak. I am Kathy Zuzzi. I live at 202 Hamilton Street, and I'm the president of Magazine Beach Partners. And I'm here to ask you today to please vote yes for the city manager's agenda item number 5 to invest $600,000 at Magazine Beach for phase 2-1. As we discussed with all of you last year, we now have a landscape plan for the park, and it's time we make improvements. Neither the state nor the city have the money to commit to funding the whole project at once. The whole project is estimated at $10 million. So the plan is to make improvements to the park in 4 phases. So tonight's request is to fund that first phase, phase 2-1, which will improve the shoreline and what I call the outdoor living room around the Powder Magazine. And the goal there is we just restored the Powder Magazine, and the goal is to create a better living space to expand the patio around it and add a riverfront terrace to make it a better place to gather and hopefully to help DCR find a better community-oriented tenant for the building. With 500,000 acres of parklands to attend to, DCR, an underfunded state agency, invests at Magazine Beach only because the city and the community pitch in. Working with the city, Magazine Beach Partners, we provide free summer programming at the park, and we stay on the case. We've got to have this river parkland. Yes, it's managed by DCR, but the same need exists for the 17 acres that compelled city leaders to create this park in the 1890s. So please invest in Phase 2-1 improvements at the park, and thank you so much for all of your support at Magazine Beach.
Thank you. Kenneth Carson, followed by Polly Cobb.
Yes, good evening. Kenneth Carson, 52 Chestnut Street, and I'm with Magazine Beach Partners on the board with Kathy, and I'll speak specifically, and I too am supporting item 5 of the city manager's agenda for the $600,000 funding. And I'd like to speak specifically to the benefits that will accrue with this work on this particular portion of Magazine Beach. We now have the vastly improved kayak launch and outlook at one end, the BU Bridge end, and DCR will be doing the major portion of work to improve the patio around the Powder Magazine, and this addresses the portion of the riverfront between. And it's a particularly valuable piece of work because there are so few areas along the river anywhere for people to enjoy the river at a good distance from heavy vehicular traffic. And this is one of the nicest, quietest stretches of the river in a park state. And this work will truly make it possible for people to enjoy proximity to the river in a way that can't be done now because of the condition of the muddy pathway and the overgrown invasive weeds that block the river. So this partnership of the city and DCR and Magazine Beach Partners is poised to make another very substantial improvement, and we hope you'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Polly Cobb? Let's see, Polly. Oh, there you are. Followed by Virginia Coleman.
My name is Pulaksani Cobb. I live at 140 Lexington Avenue. I'm here to speak concerning policy order number 6 on whether a sub-precinct polling station can be sited on Cambridge Park Drive for the 2019 municipal election. I understand that it can be difficult for voters to contend with Aylroy Brook Parkway, especially during rush hour. Driving to the present precinct might be more challenging than walking, or best of all, biking. However, though it is time-consuming, it is certainly not onerous. The Commonwealth, however, only allows a single polling place per precinct. That really settles it. Right now, however, there are 2,746 registered voters in all of Ward 11, Precinct 1. Of those, 1,857 do not live on Cambridge Park Drive. The growth there has been great, it's true. If we were to move the Ward 11 Precinct 1 polling place to Cambridge Park Drive, the only alternative to making it more convenient for those living there, more voters would be affected than if it is left at Jefferson Park. Ward 9 Precinct 2 has also seen a burst of residential building since 2010, especially along the western length of Concord Avenue. Those voters have to face getting through both of the rotaries of Concord Avenue and Fresh Pond Parkway to get to the Armory to vote. All of the polling locations in East Cambridge have challenges. Getting from North Point to the corner of 6th and Thorndike, the polling place serving those voters, people have to contend with the O'Brien Highway and all of the snarled traffic where Cambridge Street and the O'Brien intersect. We are 1 year away, however, from the federal census. I bring this up because after it is completed, the Election Commission will draw new precinct lines. As happened in 2010, there is likely to be intense population pressure from both the east and the west sections of the city, where many of the new, larger buildings have been built. That pressure ripples throughout the city in such a way that all precinct lines may have to be reconfigured. By 2021 or 22, the Election Commission will have redrawn the maps and perhaps have faced the challenge of finding different polling locations that meet all of the requirements to qualify as polling locations. Creating a new and most likely very temporary polling location for a part of a precinct, even if it were allowed, would sow confusion and probably inflame resentments. Making changes should only be undertaken as part of a larger set of considerations. Happily, the census will supply that. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, you want to leave your comments in the basket? You did? Okay, wonderful. Virginia Coleman, followed by Laura McMurray.
Thank you. Virginia Coleman, 2 Berkeley Place. I'm here to discuss the leaf blower ordinance, which is item Roman numeral 3.4 on your agenda. The ordinance would ban leaf blowers in Cambridge. All leaf blowers, all year, subject to a grace period of 2 years for the city to transition to blowerless maintenance of certain city-owned properties. Now is not the time to get into particulars. There's be time enough for that in the Ordinance Committee. Nor do I wish to dwell on the ways in which leaf blowers are noxious to humans, non-human creatures, and plants. Any of you who need a refresher on that can look at the statement of purpose at the beginning of the proposed ordinance. What I would like to stress at this time is the overriding importance of acting on this issue and acting now. Human-caused environmental degradation, most notably, but not solely, in the form of climate change, is real, and the future, if nothing is done, is apocalyptic. That will not come to pass in my lifetime, but certainly in the lifetimes of my 6 grandchildren, 3 of whom are under age 3. I care deeply about the world they will inherit. We have a president who is doing everything he can to hasten the apocalypse. Cambridge, though, for its part, has a proud record of recognizing reality and doing what is feasible at the municipal level to mitigate an increasingly dire future. Composting is now in effect citywide. The city is very much encouraging reducing waste. Plastic bags have been banned. Bike lanes have been installed to encourage cycling. The dwindling of the city's leaf canopy has attracted alarm, and the council is going to struggle to deal with this tonight. Given the urgency of the larger overriding situation and the city's altogether praiseworthy attempts to do what it can, banning leaf blowers is, I would submit, a no-brainer. Leaf blowers are a solution in search of a problem. Rakes and brooms served the purpose admirably before leaf blowers, and they will do so after leaf blowers. Commercial landscapers will need to make adjustments, and their clients may need to pay a bit more. Consider, however, that the landscaping crews who are now exposed to the soul-crushing roar of blowers, the fumes and the particulates churned up by blowers, will survive their jobs with their hearing and breathing capacity intact. Isn't that worth something? Banning blowers is a little step. Will it save the planet? Of course not. But it is a really, really easy step. If we do not have the will or don't think it's important enough or can't be bothered to take this step, how are we going to take the hard steps? Think about it, and please do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And please leave your comments in the basket, if you can. Laura McMurray.
My name is Laura McMurray. I live at 334 Harvard Street, apartment H2. I am in favor of this ban on all leaf blowers in the city of Cambridge, both the gasoline leaf blowers and the electric ones, as described in the petition with ID number 8703. This petition would amend Chapter 8.16 about noise control of the Cambridge Municipal Code of Ordinances. Why do I favor this ban? First of all, leaf blowers are painfully noisy. Secondly, the gas models in particular give off unburned fuel from unregulated engines, and they emit carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, and other toxins. The electric models also, of course, emit CO2, albeit indirectly from the power plants that gives them their electricity. All of these leaf blowers are stirring up dust, molds, and bacteria from animal feces. This is not good for asthma or lungs. The present regulations they've been carefully drafted previously, allowing certain times of year, certain hours of the day, certain days, but I believe they are not easily enforceable. I believe a total ban would be much easier to enforce. I think rakes and brooms are fine, and I don't think we need to keep our yards and parks as neat and pristine as we do our living rooms. The citizens' proposal, I haven't read it with a fine-tooth comb, but I've gone over it, and it seems to me to be pretty carefully drafted. I've not met Virginia until just now, so I don't know if she knows what she's doing, but it seemed good. I do like the idea that it would go into effect soon, which is June 30th of this year. However, I also like the idea of the phase-in for the city of 2 years, because the city obviously has a bigger operation with the Public Works Department, and I think they can figure out how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Conway, followed by Charles Franklin. Brian here? No, Charles? I see Charles. He stepped out. Ann Stewart. Oh, wait. Charles!
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, Stephen Nutter, the Charles Franklin, 162 Hampshire Street. Yes, there it is. All right. Stephen Nutter, the Green Cambridge Executive Director, couldn't make it tonight, so I'm going to be speaking as a board member. Green Cambridge fully supports the tree protection ordinance presented tonight. The proposed changes are critical for the protection of our trees, which provide an underspoken service to the city. They're only the ordinance is only temporary until the Tree Task Force recommends permanent ordinances, but we must stop the bleeding now. I'm going to speak on lodging, my personal opinion. On lodging in single-room occupancy houses, I think when done well and when done properly, they can be a boon to the community. I lived in one the summer after graduating, and I greatly appreciated and benefited from the strong community and support system that the residents created. However, we have to be careful not to send a signal to the universities that they can continue to shirk on their duty to house their students. MIT and Harvard have so much land and so much money. They need to do more. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can leave the comments, Jess. Thank you. Ann Stewart.
Ann Stewart, 2531 Wheeler Street. I'm speaking on behalf of 12 other owner-abutters. We understand and appreciate that large developments, such as the one proposed next to us, which have received special permits, are exempt from the proposed moratorium on tree cutting. And we look forward to the Urban Task Force draft recommendations this spring. But the development, unfortunately, continues to be subject to erroneous claims, and recently we learned that 10 citizens, none of whom is an abutter, appealed to the Commonwealth's Department of Environmental Protection in another effort to stop the project, and we are aware of another appeal, but we haven't seen it. In January 2017, we first heard about plans to construct the 525 rental units on the 6-acre site, which is currently vacant. We don't want to see the existing trees destroyed at that time or even now, but the previous owner never allowed public access, at least since 2007, when our property was first constructed. We were concerned about future traffic to and from the project, part of which faces loading docks, which are used every day and night, including weekends. And so for more than 2 years, many of us have met with the developers and their team And early on, Councilor Carlone and then Councilor Devereaux, I'd like to acknowledge your input, participated and shared their urban planning knowledge and political expertise, and we've also walked the street with Traffic Director Barr. When 55 is finished, there will be a new park which the public could use. The park is also a landing site for a future pedestrian, bike, mobility van connection over the MBTA tracks.
And I'm going to interrupt for 1 second because 55 Wheeler Street is not on the agenda.
Correct.
The tree moratorium is. If you can bring this back to the moratorium.
Yes.
Because I know some people want 55 Wheeler Street to be included in the moratorium, but 55, the project itself, is not on the agenda tonight.
Well, the point that we'd like to make is that when this is finished, we will have a park. We will have more trees in that area, which is currently barren and not accessible. And we believe that the development incorporates some of the ideals that Envision Cambridge wishes to embrace, and it sets a high bar for future development. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you can leave your comments, that'd be great. Mike Diganji, followed by Judy Johnson.
I think I might be on the wrong. I was here to talk about micromobility.
It's on the agenda. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're good.
So my name is Mike DeGangi. I am a Boston resident and one of the co-founders of a local scooter sharing company called B-Scoot. And we're just here because we want to strongly push for a pilot program in Cambridge. We believe scooters are a viable mode of transportation that can really change how we move through cities, as well as solve a lot of existing problems that we face today in cities. It also brings back the fun to daily commuting, as well as they're very green, as everyone's aware of. There is a caveat, though. If not done properly or in cooperation with cities, scooter sharing can become disruptive, chaotic, and eventually unsafe. Personally, I've been a scooter rider in the city for over 18 months. About 6 months into owning a scooter, I got rid of my car. About 3 months after that, I started using the T. In 3 more months, I'll be a full-fledged Bostonian. So that is what's possible out of bringing scooters here. Again, we have seen them done disruptively and chaotically elsewhere, but we really want to push for Cambridge to look at doing a pilot program and integrating this into your current modes of transportation in your city. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy Johnson, followed by Randy Mail.
Judy Johnson, 55 Antrim Street, speaking on the tree ordinance. Oh, happy day to see improvements to the tree ordinance. I've lived in Cambridge for 19 years, and for most of that time I thought maybe the city didn't care. It was very painful to watch the silver maple forest being cut down, a floodplain forest, and also the Gilmore Street mature and healthy pear trees that were taken down because a neighbor didn't like them. And the recent cutting of the Inman Square trees, taken down because the design couldn't or wouldn't include them. I am hopeful that the 55 Wheeler Street trees can be included in the moratorium. They're also a floodplain, valued for their part in addressing climate change. I also request the city to revisit the process that the planning board uses to give special permits to developers and to make improvements in the process. Don't let trees be cut down because of mistakes in the process. Trees must be given high consideration when a project is first begun. Design around them, include them. This is the beginning and not the end of our campaign to protect trees in Cambridge. We must work on protecting and caring for all trees, as well as a very aggressive plan to plant many more. Perhaps even in the future, we could realize that trees and all of nature deserve protection under the law. As Christopher Stone wrote in his book, Should Trees Have Standing? Yes, trees should be protected under the law. There's another book I meant to bring tonight about trees in the urban forest, and there was a note in it that said that Washington, D.C. Passed their tree ordinance in 2002. We're a little behind, but I know that we can catch up because we're a great city, and let's just keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Please leave your comments. Randy Mail, followed by Rebecca Levine.
Good evening. Randy Mail, 146 Berkshire Street. From 2002 to 2016, I contributed to the Cambridge retirement system in my position as recycling director. It's an honor to be here. I'm here to ask you to support policy order number 9 related to state legislation HD 2817 and SD 505, an act to authorize independent retirement systems to divest from fossil fuel companies. Thanks to Councilors Zondervan, Devereaux, and Carlone for supporting this. In 2013, this council passed a resolution supporting the principle of fossil fuel divestment. Thank you. I've been volunteering as the lead organizer on these bills with the Mass Divest Coalition and Fossil Free Somerville. As the city is well aware, the fossil fuel era is ending. The low carbon economy is the biggest investment opportunity of our generation, and addressing climate change is an imperative. Currently, PERAC, or the Public Employee Retirement Administration Commission, is blocking Massachusetts pension system trustees from exercising their prudent decisions to decarbonize their portfolios and eliminate climate-related financial risk. Public pensions can and must eliminate exposure to substantial losses from the fossil fuel industry, which is now considered high risk. Pension trustees should be able to exercise their fiduciary duty and protect the financial health of their portfolios and help ensure they can meet obligations to retirees. 4.2% of the Cambridge Retirement Board portfolio is invested in fossil fuels, or $60 million. Statewide, Cambridge is one of 104 independent retirement systems. There is an estimated $4 billion invested in fossil fuel companies in Massachusetts public pensions. This bill has strong support in the legislature with 71 co-sponsors. Cambridge legislators supporting this bill include House Reps Dave Rogers, Marjorie Decker, Mike Connolly, Jonathan Hecht, and Jay Livingstone. State senators include Pat Jalen and Sal DiDomenico. This bill has been officially endorsed by Mass Power Forward, Mass Sierra Club, 350 Better Future Project, and Environment Mass. In Massachusetts, 16 municipalities, including Cambridge, and 5 public sector unions have passed resolutions in support of fossil fuel divestment. 13 foundations and 5 educational institutions have also committed to divest in full or in part, and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center has also divested. Globally, over 1,000 institutional investors have committed to fossil fuel divestment with combined assets of $8 trillion. This includes 130 pension funds in 10 countries with over $1.2 trillion in assets. U.S. pensions committed to divesting in full or in part include in California, New York City, D.C., Providence, and several other states are working to do the same. Thank you for your leadership and formal support on these bills.
Thank you. If you could please email those comments, that would be great. Rebecca Levine, followed by Lee Farris.
My name's Rebecca Levine. I'm from 125 Harvard Street, and I have no prepared remarks. I'm going to claim the single working mom card there and just speak off the cuff. I want to thank Craig Kelly for bringing forward a motion that I believe is, I think it's tonight. Hope I'm on. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, relating to housing in Cambridge, and in specific, I am speaking on behalf of the other residents of my building at 125 Harvard Street. We are very grateful and glad to have participated in affordable limited equity condos. 125 Harvard Street is also known as the print shop. But we have unfortunately found ourselves in a situation with a building that was poorly constructed, to put it kindly, and have wound up essentially underwater with limited ability to find our way out of that hole. I am also speaking for the residents in my building, most of whom do not originally come from this country, speak English, or understand why they're in this conundrum or facing it. That they're suddenly dealing with a situation in which they're paying so much more in fees to the condo association than they ever signed up for with their mortgage. And there looks like there's no way out of that except for to take out more loans. So I would like to be grateful for any support that the council can give to help people figure out a way to, at some point or another, not have to deal with a limited ability to recoup their costs. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lee Ferris, followed by Ellen Mass.
Lee Ferris, 269 Norfolk Street, Cambridge, Mass. I'm here to speak tonight about the tree ordinance, to speak in support of it. And I'm speaking for the Cambridge Residents Alliance. We are strongly in support of the revisions to require a permit before removal of a large, healthy tree, and of the changes to stop granting those permits for 1 year until the recommendations from the Urban Forest Task Force are implemented. I also want to mention that I'm a homeowner with 2 large trees in my yard, so this ordinance applies to me personally. So, as they say, I have skin in the game. I did notice when I was reviewing the copy of the ordinance that was outside on the table that it's also exempting city park projects from needing a permit, and I have concerns about that. I didn't hear discussion about that at the ordinance meeting, but perhaps I missed it. In addition to hoping that you pass the ordinance tonight, I hope that the council will continue discussions with city staff about the draft regulations that were presented on February 14th. I think they need a little bit more work, but I don't think now here in the council meeting is the time to deal with that. And I also hope that during this 1 year period, the council will work with the manager so that city staff communicate with all current and potential developers about the city's desire to limit tree removal, and also communicate the same thing to the planning board and the BZA with a request that proposed tree removals be discussed in hearings. And I hope that we will see further action in the future on trees once the urban forest recommendations, task force recommendations come in. That will significantly strengthen beyond this proposed changes to the ordinance tonight. And then I also wanted to mention with regard to the order that is number 7 on the policy order list about lodging houses. I don't see any reference to those lodging houses being affordable to people, and I'm not really sure why we would want to add more lodging houses unless the aim is specifically that they be affordable. So I hope you can discuss that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And you email your comments, Lee?
I did email them.
Oh, great. Alan Mass, followed by Robert Latremoy.
I want to start off just thanking the counselors that have promoted the moratorium, and it's not been a simple matter. This is the third session now where it's been discussed, and I want to fully support this effort to begin the process of taking the tree canopy very seriously, as the council has done based on the mandate from over 7,000 voters who voted #1 for trees in the city, that it's of great concern that obviously the citizens begin to understand the function and the purpose of having a strong tree canopy. And as Watertown and Somerville are going to great lengths to connect tree functions of roots, canopy, and their 24-hour labor of carbon sequestration to the importance of expanding our city's urban forest for mitigating climate change, especially in New England, where precipitation is to increase 4 times faster than anywhere in the United States. And that is now coming out in major U.S. publications. New England is getting it, getting the precipitation impacts of the entire country, the major ones. So things don't end there. We have been painstakingly working and have submitted an appeal. There are actually 2 appeals to make sure that there's compliance with the permits now given a special permitted property. We keep referring to 55 Wheeler and that it's not on the agenda. Well, it's not on the agenda, but we're asking that the city continue, as the previous speaker has mentioned, to when this moratorium goes forward, and I hope it will, that this situation will be looked into, but special permits in general are of concern in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Letremoy, followed by Susan Ringler.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Robert Letremoy. I'm chair of Friends of the White Geese. I'm talking concerning the 2 reports on tree protections and on city manager's item number 5. I have problems with the so-called tree protection because exempted from these tree protections are 2 of the most destructive entities as far as trees go in the city of Cambridge, and 2 of the most destructive entities as far as the environment goes in the city of Cambridge. I'm talking about, of course, the city of Cambridge and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I have a lot more details in this 13-page package with a lot of photos. One photo is on the front page. This is of a part of the city that the city council, in multiple votes, called the irreplaceable Silver Maple Forest. Cambridge and the DCR destroyed 3.4 acres, and this is what was destroyed by a city council. We're talking about how irreplaceable it is. Also destroyed by the city of Cambridge was a magnificent woods on the Cambridge Common. The explanation was blocking a monument. Nobody knows the name of the monument. But that woods got destroyed anyway. 1 mile, 2 miles between the BU Bridge and Longfellow Bridge. Hundreds of trees destroyed. Hundreds. Outrage on Magazine Beach. The 2 created an outrage on Magazine Beach. The 2 introduced poisons to Magazine Beach. Poisons which the DCR loves. But these poisons, in the last year, people representing the DCR and helped out by the city of Cambridge have rerouted those poisons into the Charles River. As part of this package, so-called improvements, there's been a boat dock which was destroyed by the city of Cambridge and the DCR, which is being improved. The plans were secret. The plans had the same goal as this bizarre starvation wall, which was introduced in the same package. Starve the resident animals. And that project made it worse. And this latest project, once again it's secret. You've got improvements, quote unquote, on the river. But there's no plans. You've got a structure being built. No plans. You have lovely words. The City Council supported the DCR on the project without limit. But somehow, looking at the DCR's filed plans of mass destruction is considered irrelevant. Nonsense.
Thank you. Susan Ringler, followed by Patrick Barrett.
Good evening. My name is Susan Ringler. I live at 82 Kinnaird Street. I'm here this evening to speak in favor of a couple of things. Firstly, I'm speaking in favor of the tree ordinance amendments. They're small, but they're significant, and they're definitely a step in the right direction. So I absolutely urge you to pass these temporary measures this evening that will start us in the right direction, and then our urban forest task force can do some further things when they get further along with their process. I'd also like to speak in favor of the divestment of the pension funds. I think that that's a terrific opportunity to support that. Fossil fuel will become a less and less good investment as years go on, and we can really get on top of this. And I'd also like to thank you for honoring Paula Shiraga, who was a wonderful woman and citizen and who dearly loved the trees. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patrick Barrett, followed by Heather Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Patrick Barrett, 41 Pleasant Street. I'm here to do a couple things to thank the council for their contribution and the support of Magazine Beach renovations. And as a new member of the Riverside community, I'm excited about that. But also, I'm here to talk about the leaf blower ordinance and the moratorium on trees. Just as a thought, it seems the council is very eager in a lot of instances to place moratoria or to penalize, and very rarely has that worked. And I wonder why the council, if trees are an absolute emergency, as has been stated, why are we not encouraging, why are we finding incentives to keep trees? I've oftentimes been here when this particular issue has been brought up about private property and the city council's reach into my land to prevent me from taking a tree down. To me, it's an overstep, but I'm interested in hearing the council out, but I don't like doing it under the auspice of a moratorium. I think that that's just kind of a bridge too far. Most likely it was going to pass. I think that there's a lot of momentum for it, but I think you have to think about what you're actually going to accomplish during this year. Will you prevent people from knocking down more trees? Maybe. Is it enforceable? Not really. So what have you done? I hope in the meantime you spend more time trying to figure out how to incent people to plant more trees and to grow the canopy, because I think that's probably a much more productive and much more friendly environment. On the leaf blower thing, when I moved into my house, my mom gave me an electric leaf blower as a housewarming gift. I'm never getting rid of it, ever, ever, ever. I appreciate that some people don't like them. As a sound burden, if you want to call it that, I've done my own tests on projects with Ascentech to test the ambient noise in Central Square in Riverside, where I live. And it's about 60 to 65 decibels, just regular traffic noise. My leaf blower is rated at about 55. So if you're going to get rid of leaf blowers, get rid of every vehicle first, and then talk to me about the noise about leaf blowers. Also, I have a deck. I guess that's a first world problem. I have little 1/8 inch slats in between the spaces. And the only way to get those leaves out is to blow them out with a leaf blower. So if I can't knock down my neighbor's tree, which I really want to do, and it rains leaves all over my house, and I can't blow them away with my leaf blower, you're kind of tying my hands, man. So please give it some consideration. And in the future, I hope this council thinks about more incentives for property owners and for people. Sorry. And instead of trying to continually penalize us. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Hoffman, followed by Carol Winkler.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. And I have a few things to talk about before I get to the trees. First off, you have raised the issue that is my bread and butter, and that is title on talking about ADUs. Unless it's a recorded document that says you can or can't do something, it's not a title issue, and please don't call it one. The zoning ordinance is not a title issue. Now, as to the First Amendment, I would point out that as an email reminded me earlier today, it's the 50th anniversary of the Tinker case. And so whether we like or don't like what people are saying, I have to agree that mostly, outside of suggesting violence and things like that, or cutting down a neighbor's tree, you're allowed to do it. With respect to the request to change the sign at City Paint to the totally boring, corporate, ugly thing, I'm really sorry that it looks as though you should vote for it. And I wish that Benjamin Moore, or whoever is doing this new sign, had just a tiny bit of soul, because there's a nice sign there now. It's got some verve. With respect to live music performance, I know that some people were worried that this was about performing outside, and I read through it, and I can't see that. So perhaps you would like to say that if you're outside, no amplification, but if you're inside, one mic is okay as long as you aren't blasting the neighbors. With respect to SROs, I have spoken before about how I think we really need to consider various things other than full-fledged apartments because, as was pointed out by a previous speaker, they can, and I would agree with her, should be affordable alternatives. So let's look at that and look at making it affordable. And then with respect to crossing Mass Ave at Day Street, I would point out if your foot isn't in the crosswalk, they don't have to stop. Now, with respect to the trees, until we change our culture to believe that trees are an asset and they're important, no law we pass is going to do a darn thing. It's absolutely true. But it starts with the city, and it starts at the top. So all of you have to believe and communicate that trees are assets and they're important, and we shouldn't be cutting them down. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Winkler, followed by Charles Teague.
Hello, I apologize. I have issues with my voice. My name is Carol Winkler. I'm the landlord at number 1, number 3, number 4, and number 5 Sedgwick Road, just small gravel road next to Kirkland Street. I'm coming here to comment about the trees. So I think that public-private partnerships are the most positive way to make change happen. And with respect to the trees, I'd like to tell you a little bit, a story that I've had. We had an issue with our irrigation bill, and the city of Cambridge worked with me to try to help lower the $7,000 irrigation bill because they found out that we had a 100-foot-long lead pipe that was going to need to be replaced underneath Sedgwick Road. I cannot tell you how grateful I've always been for that. I gladly then shelled out the money to have the water pipe replaced. And from that point on, I have done everything I can to make these properties around Sedgwick Road look as beautiful as possible. I have invested thousands of dollars in plants, shrubs, and trees. Our properties have been on the Secret Garden Tour. However, I do not think the tree cutting moratorium is the way to increase the tree canopy, and let me tell you why. Number one, I think that homeowners, myself included, are not well educated on what to do when things go wrong with your trees. If you really care about the trees of Cambridge, then I think we need to start a program that will help educate homeowners on how to better take care of their trees. Perhaps a tree that was once in a perfect spot is no longer appropriate for that spot. Perhaps they need to replace it with a new tree. But I just know for myself that is an issue. Number two, I think we should institute discounts for the city of Cambridge for residents who want to purchase new trees or experiment with little groups of trees. If they were not so expensive, and if the tree care were not so expensive, perhaps more of us would be willing to jump in. But finally, I really oppose a moratorium on tree cutting, and let me tell you why. First of all, it's going to have the unintended consequence of having homeowners like me never, ever, ever be willing to plant another tree. And the reason is because it will never, ever be able to be taken out. So let me give you an example. A few years ago, when we replaced the pipe, we were forced to get rid of a lovely oak tree. It was huge. Some of you might remember it because the pipe was going right underneath it. It was a big tragedy. So I've been thinking of trying to plant another tree there. Do you think I'm going to if you do this moratorium? Absolutely not. When we first acquired these properties starting in 2000, bye.
Charles Teague.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Charles Teague, 23 Edmund Street. I'm saying the opposite. I hope you will approve the revisions to the tree protection ordinance tonight, especially with the amendments from the February 14th hearing. The short version is the task force, the city's own task force. It says you can't plant your way out of the problem we have, is that the tree loss has to be cut in half, and there isn't a plan yet to cut it in half. So this is just saying take a break, let's figure it out. And I really want to, once again, I can't thank them enough, the city staff, for all their work that they did for the February 14th amendments. So I hope you'll add those amendments to it tonight. And then finally, on a personal note, I just saw Councilor Toomey's resolution on the passing of my former neighbor, John Courtney. And I really want to thank you for putting that in tonight. Thank you. Bye now.
Okay. Did I see Brian Conway come in?
Good evening. I'm here to support recommend my support that you support the agenda number 5 for the funding of Magazine Beach Park. Tremendous resource for the city that is used by predominantly city people. And I mentioned too that it's not only the city that's kicking in, but DCR and Magazine Beach Partners, and I think another group is also joining in funding this next phase of the park. So I hope that you support that appropriation. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes those who signed up. If there anyone who did not sign in who would like to speak, I saw James first, then Peter. Let's just try to do this orderly, folks.
Thank you. James Williamson, 1000 Jackson Place. As I brought up before, there's something fundamentally problematical about the tree protection ordinance that's being proposed to be amended, which I don't know that there's yet sufficient interest in examining and improving or addressing anyway, considering what I would think would be an improvement, which has to do with the fact that there's a whole portion of the community in Cambridge who are exempt, and that's those people who are living in affordable housing. Because the section which is proposed to be amended says it does not apply to any project of the Affordable Housing Trust or otherwise for the construction of low and moderate income housing. And we had an interpretation from the city solicitor that that also included inclusionary zoning units, which means all the big residential buildings in the city are presumably exempt from the tree protection ordinance, at least if that interpretation is correct. So there are two problems there. One is all of the major residential developments in the city are, by definition, excluded from this. And people who live in affordable housing, and I think, as I've said before, I think this is an environmental justice issue, are somehow seen as not being worthy of having the same protection for the trees that exist as everybody else in the city. And I think that's a deficit in this, which is as important to address, or at least almost as important to address as trying to do what we all can to preserve. The new term is tree canopy. How about just trees? So I'll just give you, I want to illustrate something about why some things end up being exempt and other things don't end up being exempt. At Jefferson Park, the new construction at Jefferson Park, which some of you are familiar with, they originally proposed to cut down all the trees. That was 97 trees. They ended up agreeing to save 8. During construction, they went ahead and cut down an additional 4, so they ended up saving 4 trees along Ringe Ave. But what they did when they built is that because the zoning requires space for bicycles, there are storage spaces for bicycles for which there isn't an exemption, and those spaces are largely empty. So people can't move the trash bins around in the trash rooms. They're responsible for taking the trash bins in and out. They can't really navigate that very well, apparently. But there are empty spaces for this requirement for bicycle storage space. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be able to have bicycles, encouraged to be, but why is it that trees are not something that are deemed important for low and moderate income people to have some protection, the same as everybody else, but we have to have, there's no waiver at all available for bicycle storage. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Peter Valentine, always speaking from a cosmic perspective. I am for the well-being and diversity of Magazine Beach. I think it's important to maintain the well-being of our trees. They represent nature from which we all come from. I am against foreign powers being allowed to take control over our city.
Thank you, Peter. Come on up.
Right, thank you.
The mic's not on.
There you go. My name is Jeevan Sobrino Wheeler. I'm a resident at 19 Trowbridge Street in Cambridge. I'm here this evening to speak in favor of the tree cutting moratorium. I work with land conservation, and so I understand the importance that Cambridge's tree canopy will play in our response to climate change and the public health and well-being of our residents. I've heard it suggested that this is somehow a backdoor to preventing development, and that's simply not the case. According to a report by the planning and architecture firm Reed Hildebrand for the city of Cambridge, we've lost nearly 20% of our tree canopy since 2009. According to this report, which is available online for anyone who's interested, Cambridge has an average net loss of 31 acres of tree canopy every single year. For anyone who's not familiar with how big an acre is, it's about the size of a football field. I'd ask the City Council to picture that for a moment. We're losing 31 football fields of trees every single year in Cambridge. According to the same report by Reed Hildebrand, we currently have 25% of our land area covered by tree canopy. But if this trend continues, it will be just 16% by 2030. I'd also like to note that the vast majority of our tree canopy loss has not been street trees or trees on public land. It has been trees cut down by private contractors and developers. I'm a tenant in Cambridge, and 2/3 of our population are renters like me. We don't have anything we can do personally to stop the loss of tree canopy, because we don't own any land. This ordinance would give us a voice in the protection of our tree canopy, and it would serve as a good temporary protection until the Tree Task Force comes out with its recommendations later. I'd also like to speak this evening briefly in favor of Policy Order Number 56, opposing the proposed MBTA fare hikes. Increasing fares on the T will disproportionately impact working class residents of Cambridge who don't own cars and who depend on our buses and subways for their lives and their livelihoods. The Boston Globe recently published a report on how traffic is among the worst it's ever been in the Boston metro area, and we know that vehicle emissions are a major contributor to climate change. If we want to encourage people to take public transit instead of driving, we shouldn't be making it more expensive. At a time when some cities around the world are making their public transit systems completely free, we shouldn't be going the opposite direction with our fares. There are better ways to increase funding for the MBTA that don't include fare hikes. I would love to see the Cambridge City Council unite and send a strong signal to the MBTA that fare hikes are not okay. Thank you for the time, and I will email a copy of my comments to the clerk.
Thank you. John Pitkin, then Bob Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. John Pitkin, 18 Fayette Street. I want to speak briefly in favor of the tree ordinance. As a member of the board of Green Cambridge, I want to like to direct the council's attention to the letter from Stephen Nutter, our executive director. We have strongly support this with its amendments. We believe in trees for all, and everybody should be for trees. Personal note, I want to thank Councilors Zondervan and Carlone and Mayor McGovern for the resolution of the death of Paula Sharega, whom I came to know only recently as a demonstrator for and contributor to the defense of Vellucci Plaza and its trees. She clearly loved life in all its forms, and she had the courage of her convictions. She was a rare and admirable spirit and citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winters?
Robert Winters, 366 Broadway. I could speak on many things, but I'm going to keep it to two. First off, I think that the leaf blower regulations that we have in place today are working just fine. And I'm really kind of amazed that somebody thinks that somehow we have to go to an outright ban for devices like this when they're already very, very strictly regulated. Second thing I want to mention, and I'll keep it really fast because you all received a message from me before the Ordinance Committee meeting about this tree cutting moratorium. And I won't give you all the particulars other than to say that I'm just a person who owns a small little piece of Cambridge with one little triple decker on it, just a few trees on it, and I do have a tree that has 1 liter that is leaning on my roof that's going to have to come off regardless. It has lost some branches on the other leaders of the tree. Is the tree dead? No. Is it diseased? I don't know. Is it dangerous? You know, I don't want to have to go through, a big argument about it. I don't want to take trees down, but the thing is there are going to be times when a person has to make a difficult decision about taking down a tree. And it does cost money to do it. It's not cheap, it's not free. If this city council decides to throw an additional $500,000, $1,500 fine on top of me simply because I have to make a difficult decision, I consider that unforgivable. So I do hope you come up with an appropriate level of amendment to this to allow exemptions for people who have reasonable cases to be made so that we can do what we need to do. And I really do think if you fail to do that, you will have failed the residents of this city.
Thank you.
Hi, Deisha Goodwin, 175 Chestnut Street. I just want to speak in favor of your appropriating funds for Magazine Beach support. It's a very important resource for the city. It's a great open space. It has soccer fields, outdoor exercise stations, Little League baseball, kayak launch, swimming pool. With the Magazine Beach partners, there's been a great deal of cleanup and investment in planting and weeding. The city has partnered with DCR successfully, and with their impetus, the match of funds has occurred, and we're really, really grateful that this is going to really be the jewel in the crown that Magazine Beach should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We have Denise, and I'm sorry, I don't know who you are, but why don't you come on up?
My name is Joyce Singer.
Oh my gosh, I didn't recognize you, Joyce.
I know. 524 Franklin Street. I don't want to repeat what people have said because everyone seems so knowledgeable, but I am in favor of the moratorium. It's only a year, right? To figure out. I mean, if it doesn't work, it can be changed. I think we have several trees on our property, and it is expensive, but we usually hire someone to come and prune them and evaluate them, and it seems like not a big deal. Some of them get pruned. I do have one thing that maybe people have said is that between the power company and the way they prune or not prune, there's a tree in front of my house, and on the side of our house, it's a corner that don't even look like trees anymore. They just look like modern art. And I think the city needs to take better care of the city-owned trees so that they live and flourish. And the tree on the side of our house on Bay Street, I mean, branches fall off, and I don't know if it's because of the way it's pruned. I know the power company goes by periodically. I mean, we have a tree, a city tree that sometimes goes right over our roof, and the person we hire just prunes it back. I mean, he responsibly prunes it back, so. But it is expensive. That's it.
Thanks, Joyce. Denise?
Thank you. Good evening. Denise Gilson, 2203 Mass Ave. I'm a member of the Urban Forest Task Force, and our next meeting, and I encourage all of you to attend, will be on Thursday, the 7th of March. So I had 5 trees removed last Friday. If there was a moratorium, I would not have been able to do that. The reason that we did it, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when I was here, that we had 5 dead trees, and we knew that it was going to be very windy today. It is very likely that 1 or more of those trees would have come down in this wind, and somebody could have gotten hurt or there could have been property damage. If this moratorium goes into effect, there will not be enough time for a property owner to make that kind of a decision. It just won't be. So I caution all of you to really think long and hard about this. Look, we love our trees. We name our trees. I don't know how many people in the city of Cambridge name their trees, but our trees have names in the yard. And I tell my grandchildren, you cannot climb on Matthew, go climb on George. So this isn't about me not liking trees or not understanding the value of trees or not having a great appreciation for our tree canopy. But we have a task force that has been looking at this issue for months. We're getting ready to create policy. And I don't understand why we have to take this measure when we have people have been meeting for months under the guidance of the City of Cambridge Department of DPW and with hiring the most amazing consultants. We're so close to making decisions. I don't understand the problem. And there's a practical issue, and I just talked about it. So I hope that you'll really consider this, this moratorium, because there are issues that property owners will be confronted with, and you're making it extremely difficult for us to take action when action needs to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who, come on up, Nicola.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Councilors. Nicola Williams, 8 Brewer Street. I'll be brief. I basically support the stay moratorium, whatever we're calling it. It's only a year. I feel that we've been having this conversation for a long time, and I'm concerned that a lot of trees are being cut down because people are fearful, and we just need to make a decision, put this in place so that we can have the time to sort through what we need to do. Trees are an asset to the city. I feel that our neighbor Somerville has taken good responsibility in dealing with this. We've been having this conversation for a while. Trees can't wait. I feel the root of the matter is that people, including developers, are not very informed about the value of our assets and our trees, and that city has a responsibility and an opportunity to provide public education, similar to how we've done for composting, on why trees are valuable, so that we can be more proactive. And I encourage you to consider that, because trees can't wait. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else who has not signed in who would like to speak, please come on up. Your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on, please.
My name is Elizabeth Gilmore, and I live at 47 Reservoir Street. And I submitted a written statement earlier, but it was too late to be included for tonight, so I'm here to read it instead. I would like to urge you to approve the tree protection moratorium. The way things are currently constructed has meant that huge swaths of our urban tree canopy have been removed. Until there can be an ordinance that has a city power behind it, this cutting will continue unchecked. For the sake of our elderly citizens who struggle in the heat of increasingly hot summers, for the sake of our children who suffer higher rates of respiratory distress due to air pollution, and on behalf of all Cambridge citizens who feel overwhelmed by our recent population explosion, please speak up on behalf of our city trees and vote for this ordinance to protect them. Otherwise, right here in a city full of climate experts and committed environmental protectors, we ourselves will be our own undoing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on, please.
Sure. Good evening, Council. My name is Sneha Chitte. I'm representing Super Pedestrian Incorporated, which is a robotics company out here in 84 Hamilton. We're just here to speak in favor of the micromobility agenda that you have real quick. We've been working on products focusing on safety and being secure about the new technologies and new opportunities that the city may have in terms of transportation. And we would like to help out in any way possible from our end. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? On a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to close public comment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and public comment is closed. We move to reconsiderations. There are none. We move to the city manager's agenda on a motion by Councilor Kelly to bring the city manager's agenda before us for discussion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Siddiqui.
Number 2, please.
Pleasure of the council. Nothing? On the balance, roll call.
On the consent agenda items, Council Calhoun. Yes. Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui. Council Simmons. Yes. Council Toomey. Yes. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the consent agenda items are adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We move back to city manager agenda item number 2, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, city manager, relative to awaiting report item number 18-99 regarding a report on potential for the creation and implementation of a survey or other feedback mechanism for individuals who have been in touch with the Human Rights Commission. This was pulled by Councilor Siddiqui. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I had a few questions about the survey format that you've laid out, specifically in coming up with these questions. You know, were there other examples you looked at? What was the survey kind of methodology approach to figure out what to ask?
We looked at I discussed it with our attorney investigator, asked her the sorts of questions we've gotten in the past, we're both aware of the sorts of calls we get and what issues people who have called after a case, who might be confused, might have concerns about the outcome in terms of what they thought might have happened. And we sort of worked together and came up with these. They seem to be responsive to the activity in the office.
Something that I have been thinking about, I've taken a lot of surveys online and in other places, and one thing that I think would be helpful would be to be more specific if, for example, the person has reached out asking, saying they're looking for a referral, and, you ask, were the staff able to refer you to another resource, perhaps figuring out if is that legal aid, is that another resource? So just so we have that anecdotal information. Another thing that I think would be helpful is, there's a question about the staff being able to answer your questions about its procedures. I think that's important. I think what I have found helpful when I've filled out surveys is whether or not questions are answered in a timely manner. So perhaps asking whether it's done in a timely manner, and even the initial contact that's made in the beginning of the process, is that timely when someone does leave a message. I think I'm aware that it has been very timely, and we certainly appreciate that. But I think that is all information that's useful.
Okay.
And I think above all, reading kind of you've provided information about how the conciliation process works, as a whole. I think it is slightly confusing, and I wonder when the person does start the complaint, that process, it'd be helpful knowing how well the staff do actually explain the process itself.
The staff who answers these questions is our attorney investigator, so she
goes through the process from the
any
beginning.
question they might have. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think that a survey mechanism of this sort is very important, and I think we should be moving the needle. I think it is one of those things where perhaps it hasn't been done and you don't do it, but I think with these matters, feedback is important, and sometimes there's things that happen and you may not be aware, and so that's why it is very important for the city to have this information if they need to make changes. So that's all I have to say. I hope that we can expedite having this format rolled out online and with referenced in the letters as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I had a couple questions around the format because it's not real clear here how it's going to look, like what. So some of these questions, was the HRC staff able to answer questions about procedures? Is that just going to be yes, no? Is it going to be yes, no with a box to say more?
Probably boxes for all to allow people to respond the way they choose to respond.
Because I think that part is critical, because you could have a lot of yeses or nos, but not have any real context around why the yes or why the no. So I think having a format that is going to allow, if we're going to have this survey, I think to allow for the most amount of feedback to come back to us so we can have real good data. And then my last suggestion would be to add a question: what was the outcome of your complaint? Because I think that's probably critical for us to know, both in looking at the answers that we get, if there's a way to kind of refer back to say, okay, well, we know that the outcome was X, and so it gives us, again, more context. Doing surveys and having them up on the website, I think, is going to be a really important thing for us to do, but you want to make sure that they're right, so they're giving you the data that you need to actually inform processes and procedures that need to be updated. So those are my two call-outs, but thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure of the council. On placing the matter on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The matter is placed on file. Don't go anywhere yet. No, you can't. Not you. The guy in the middle. Are we, Councilor Kelly?
Mr. Mayor, I'd move suspension to bring up calendar item number 5 and committee report number 1, please.
On suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are in suspension on bringing forward calendar item number 5 and committee report number 1. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the city staff. I think especially thank you to the city clerk, who's going to walk us through this as soon as she's paying attention to me.
I apologize, Councilor.
No worries. So my understanding, and Ms. Lopez, jump in when I say something wrong, is that we have incorporated the suggested amendments to the proposed amendments to the tree protection ordinance that were submitted by the city at our 14 February meeting. We accepted those as a substitution at the meeting, and then there were 2 amendments made during the meeting, both of which are currently in the amendment that was forwarded to us today. Have I got that right, Donna? Thank you. So we have a updated version of the proposed tree protection ordinance amendments. It's the tree protection ordinance amendments. It is not a moratorium in any way that I read that word. And it's at its second reading, so we can ordain it tonight because it's been sitting here since our last, some version of this has been sitting in front of the council since 2 meetings ago. So we can take it tonight and we can pass it to its final reading, and it can become effective whenever we wish. I have one amendment that I would like to propose, which is to have the effective start date be 11 March. That gives the city 2 weeks to do outreach to property owners to ensure that folks don't take advantage of spring weather or whatnot to cut down something that they don't realize is a significant tree and get socked with a surprise tree replacement fee. And then I think that we did have a public comment today that we had talked about at our ordinance committee meeting about what about trees that are crowding a home. The trees themselves aren't damaged, but they're providing some sort of, or they're presenting some sort of challenge to the property owner in a way that has more to do with the structure than it does actually necessarily with the tree. And I would like to make sure that we either choose to address it or choose not to address it. But those are the two things I would like to talk about before we pass this. And so I will make a formal amendment now that the date of, and Ms. Lopez, what do we call it, ordination? The date of ordination is the 11th of March, or it takes effect on the 11th of March. How would that read?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Kelly, I think the city solicitor would have to rule on that, because in the draft that was given to us, it says the effective date, this ordinance shall take effect only upon ordination of the companion zoning amendment and any other zoning amendments necessary to effectuate the provisions of this tree ordinance. And I'm not sure that there's anything before us as far as zoning goes. Am I correct? So will we just strike this and have the effective date March 31st? I mean, March 11th?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the document that's in front of the council is the existing tree ordinance that's in the municipal code at this time, and the only changes that have been put forward are shown on that document in redlined form and are also highlighted in yellow for convenience. That means that that last section of the ordinance, which is 8.66.110, effective date, is the language that was passed when this ordinance was last amended on August 2nd of 2004. So it would be, I believe, easy to simply say effective date. This amendment to the ordinance shall, of whatever amendment, Ms. Clerk, whatever the amendment number is, shall be effective on March 11, 2019, or whatever other date the council agrees upon. Excuse me, and to strike the rest of that language.
Councilor Kelly.
So that's what I would recommend. I'm not sure I can exactly say what was just said, but I would recommend, I would propose an amendment that we make this an effective date of 11 March. I'm loath to propose the exact language for fear of messing it up. Okay, I'm getting a nod there. So that's my proposed amendment.
Okay. Just quickly to your second point, if you look in that highlighted yellow section, after for city park projects, or for dead or dangerous trees, or where a lot is of such density with existing trees that the removal of certain significant trees is considered beneficial to the health of the tree canopy. Does that answer your second question?
That's where I would put language, but no, it doesn't. But maybe we could get the date part done, and then we can talk about any other amendments. I think other people might have other amendments as well.
Okay, so
but-
let's take this first amendment. Madam Clerk, wanna read it?
So 8.66.110 will read something like, this amendment to this ordinance number, I'll fill that in when we actually number it, shall be effective March 11, 2019.
On the amendment, any discussion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, small point, but shall take effect. We can use the same words that are there. Thank you.
On Councilor Mallon, on the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Commissioner O'Riordan. Does that give you sufficient enough time to notify all residents if it's 3/11/2019 or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, we had expected that 2 weeks would be needed, and so this provides us with that time.
Great, thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Through you, and I'm assuming that part of the communication effort is through professional channels to the, arborists of Massachusetts and all the local landscaping companies, because as we've said before, it's really they who take the trees down, not the individuals in most cases, apart from the odd individual who climbs up a step ladder and gets out a chainsaw. And I hope that doesn't, in fact, encourage people in the next 2 weeks to take unreasonable risks in cutting down trees on their own because they can't find a contractor in that amount of time.
I have a question, if there's nothing. So, Ms. Glowa, so what would then be the date of ordination? Is it, because this will expire 1 year from that, so is March 11th now the new, no, how does that work?
Mr. Mayor, the ordination date would be today, and the effective date would be March 11. So the 1 year period with no permits being issued under certain circumstances would be until a year from today.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? On the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to record in the negative.
Councilor Toomey is recorded in the negative. The amendment passes. Councilor Kelly, you still have the floor. Do you have anything else, or should I move on?
I have a proposed amendment which would go in where it says, underlined it says, for city park projects. And then there's an or there, and I would put another or first, which says, or where a tree poses significant negative impacts to an existing adjacent structure. I think that would address the challenge brought up this evening, which is...
Say it again, Councilor Kelly. We missed it.
Or where a tree poses significant negative impacts to an existing adjacent structure. And then it would continue to read, or for dead or dangerous trees.
Okay. All right. Discussion on the amendment? Anybody? Vice Mayor?
Through you to Councilor Kelly, who do you envision determining that is imposing the significant dangers?
Well, I don't know why this would be any different from the rest of what DPW is doing here. So it seems like someone at DPW would, per regulations that DPW would have, would come to that conclusion. And we learned in our committee meeting that DPW can change the regulations very quickly within the scope of the ordinance. So if it turns out that whatever is set up initially needs some tweaking or whatnot with review from other city departments, DPW can change the regulations that would implement this with some rapidity.
Vice Mayor.
Well, I guess I'd want to hear that from DPW that they wanted to be in the position of pronouncing that there was a significant, whatever your language was, structural impact, because that sounds more like the work of the Inspectional Services Department to me.
Mr. O'Riordan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if indeed this would require an assessment, Councillor, that is not an assessment that would be done by the city. That would have to be done by an independent individual, be it an arborist, depending on the circumstance, be it an arborist, be it a structural engineer, but it would not be done by the city. There would be liability issues associated with that, which we could not undertake, would cause us not to be able to undertake that. So it would have to be done by an independent individual, and we would have to craft regulations around that as well.
Councillor Mallon has a comment on the amendment. Councillor Mallon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I had some similar concerns at the committee hearing, so I'm glad that this is being brought up now. And I understand that the DPW is not going to be the organization that is going to decide whether somebody's foundation is structurally unsound because a tree root is growing into them. So this is the assessment form from the last meeting, which we didn't get tonight, but would it be added to this form for a structural engineer to fill out that section, or a contractor, or, because I'm assuming an arborist is not going to come to your house and tell you that I'm just using this foundation of your house because it's the easiest one to use at this moment. Like, an arborist is not going to make that determination. They are not going to say that that's dangerous because it's not dangerous to the tree, it's dangerous to your home. So I'm just wondering where in the paperwork that we got from the DPW at the last meeting, if that could be added or if it would be a separate piece of paper. I hate to keep adding all these things in because I know how much work you guys have done and most of you haven't slept in putting this together, and I really appreciate it, but I just wanted to ask where that actually would live.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, the tree risk assessment is done through the ISA, which is, again, an organisation specific to arborists. I am unaware at this point in time as to whether or not there are standard assessment forms that a structural engineer would use. Again, it would very much depend on the nature of the structure and the nature of the circumstance, and so it's not clear to me that there are standard forms that are in place for this type of risk assessment for a building. Certainly they could be crafted, but that may take some time. And again, in this instance here, we're looking at, specific to trees, we're looking at severe or high. And again, there are levels of risk associated with the building, and that would take some work in order to be able to put that in place.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, forgive my ignorance on the ISA and what they do. I feel like I've been to a million tree meetings and I don't fully have a full grasp of every nook and cranny of this. But so would there be something like this, which is from the DPW, the certification of certified arborist, but it would be certification of a certified structural engineer / contractor / I'm just trying to understand how that particular amendment would play out and try to avoid some unintended consequences, which I think we're all trying to do here tonight.
Ms. Loa?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think that the expertise that would be required for anyone to declare that a foundation is structurally unsound is very specific and fairly significant. A significant expertise is required. I know that when somebody is doing a construction project adjacent to another property and where there's some fear that there might be some undermining of the adjacent foundation, usually the city inspectional services department will require both the property owner's sort of structural engineer to give an opinion, and depending upon the severity of the problem, often pay for the city to hire an independent structural engineer to evaluate that assessment to make sure that the city knows what's being done. So I think that it's a fairly significant issue for anyone to be opining that somebody's structure is unsound, and I don't think that that would likely be able to be done through the ISO Tree Association. I think it's more of a, as Mr. O'Riordan suggested, it's really more of a structural engineering issue and would probably involve oversight by both Public Works and Inspectional Services.
Councilor Mellon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I agree with this spirit of this amendment 100%. I think I was really clear about that at the Ordinance Committee meeting, so I just want to make sure that we have the right tools in place to ensure that that can be done. I'm assuming over the next 2 weeks we could figure something out.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, I would tell you that as things stand, we have promulgated or we have drafted a number of regulations. It's unclear to me as to whether they're adequate or complete at this point in time. And so a lot of this is being done very rapidly, and so I cannot guarantee you that regulations that we would draft around an amendment specific to a structural issue associated with a tree in the house would be complete in 2 weeks, but we certainly make an effort to try and make it complete.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your honesty and, again, appreciate your work on this. And thank you to Councillor Kelly for putting forth this amendment.
I have Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Related to the discussion both councilors have just raised, it struck me as odd that we have definitions that have existed, but we don't say what we're talking about, and that's dangerous tree. What is a dangerous tree? And I know that's a loaded question, but the point is that's all I've heard about in emails from colleagues and friends who said they understand the principles, but we heard some discussions even from people here tonight that what's perceived as dangerous, but there's no definition. So it strikes me that that makes it even more vague. And I'm for this. I just want to make sure it covers everything you intend to cover. But it seems to me that's a critical definition. Even if you repeat what you just said, pursuant to a structural engineer / arborist, depending on the condition, certain trees are less likely to break than other trees. I know you know that. But any thoughts on that?
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, Councillor, if you look at the certification that's required from the arborist, he is required to assess as to whether the tree, the risk assessment associated with the tree, whether it's high or an extreme risk. And so one can begin to assess the level of danger associated with a given tree if one goes through the ISA risk assessment form. Because you're right, dangerous is a very broad word to use in this circumstance. When we've interpreted that as to be a circumstance where a tree is at high or extreme risk of failure. And so, to some extent, that's how we have come to define a dangerous tree in this instance.
And does it actually say here, I'm looking for it, ISA, it'll be based on an ISA?
So if you look at a certification form A, Council.
Oh, I know the form.
And it says...
I'm looking at the ordinance.
No, again, our interpretation in developing the regulations associated with the ordinance
does it mention?
It does not mention, there is no definition given of a dangerous tree in the ordinance at this point.
Does it mention the form in here? I haven't seen it.
It does not, Councillor, but it provides the authority for the commissioners to write regulations. Okay. And on that basis, we've interpreted dangerous to be a tree based on an ISA risk assessment to be of high or extreme risk of failure.
Okay. You don't think it would be clearer if that is actually mentioned in here for the average person reading it?
I think it's important, and again, this is something that we'll do as part of the outreach associated with this, Councillor, to make sure that everybody's aware that there are regulations as well as ordinances.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'd like to ask the DPW Commissioner in the draft regulations, Section 2A, and I believe 2B would have similar language. It says, number 2, a detailed narrative of the emergency circumstance requiring the removal of the significant tree as it relates to public health, safety, or welfare, signed by the owner of the property. So in your understanding of how these regulations would operate, if a property owner came to you and said, we need to remove this tree because the structure of the building will not support the tree continuing to grow there, would you consider that an emergency circumstance?
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Possibly, Councillor, but we may also require a structural assessment depending on the situation that exists. So possibly, yes.
Thank you. So under the existing language and with your draft regulations, you could potentially cover this situation that we're discussing.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Potentially, Councillor, yes.
Thank you. So it's my opinion then that we don't need to make this a specific amendment, but rather that we leave the language as is with the emergency provision and allow the DPW commissioner to interpret that ordinance and through the regulations make sure that people who need to remove a tree for structural reasons would be able to do so during the 1-year period and beyond.
Councillor Kelly, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we're all saying we want the same thing, which may not in fact be what we're saying, but if we're all saying that we want the same thing, which is if someone, for example, has the condition that we heard about earlier today, where it's not arguably an emergency in terms of a dangerous emergency, but it is something that is making the house not dangerous, but posing some sort of structural negative impacts to it. If we want that to be able to be addressed, then I suggest we call that out directly and rely on the discretion of DPW to write the regulations they feel would make that happen, and they could require some sort of statement from whomever they feel would be reasonable to make that sort of statement. If we don't want that to be something that's explicitly permitted, then obviously we wouldn't support the amendment that I've proposed. But I don't think that if we want that to happen, we want to leave it to the existing language.
Okay. Councillor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I agree with Councillor Kelly. I think it's incumbent on us to make it. If you're reading this right now, there's a list, right? There's no reason why this shouldn't also be included. If it's not included, then, it can maybe be interpreted elsewhere, but I think it's important that we get it in the ordinance.
Okay, so why don't we deal with the amendment now, and then we can continue the conversation. I have a couple questions. So on Councillor Kelly's amendment, Madam Clerk, you have the language?
Okay, we're adding this after the words for city park projects, or where a tree poses significant negative impact to an adjacent existing structure, and then we're picking up or for a dead or dangerous tree.
On the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Yeah. Who said no? You said no? You said yes. I heard a no. Did you?
Yes.
And the amendment passes. I have a couple questions, or comments. First, I want to just point out, I know that this has been discussed a lot with different community groups and in different, organizations. I just want to point out that there's been one ordinance committee meeting about this, and then it's here before us. has been an incredible amount of work and incredibly complicated for something that we are pushing through incredibly quickly. And I'm just bringing it up because I know there are other things that some people, even after 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 50 meetings, people often say, it's too fast. So I just want to make this very clear for the record, that this is moving very quickly. And as much as, yes, we can say that there is a tree emergency or a canopy emergency in the city, I just point out that there are many emergencies in the city, many things that we could and should be acting much faster on than we are, and none of them get this much attention and this much work as this ordinance has received. And I just think that's important to state because I think it also, as I said last time, we have an opioid emergency. We have people dying. And yet, if we were to try and rush through in 2 meetings, opening a safe injection site in a particular neighborhood, which we know saves lives, I would imagine that many of the people in that neighborhood would be coming forward and telling us that we're doing this too fast. So we just have to be careful how we throw around the word emergency and what we do to the process. And I just think that's important to state. So, Mr. O'Riordan, and I think your beard was brown when you started this conversation. And I know that you are Superman, and you get things done incredibly diligent. But I really want, I really want an honest answer from you here, not sort of what. Do you need a little more time to figure some of this stuff out, or is this ready to go tonight? With the amendments, just an honest, could you use an extra week? I just want to make sure that we're not putting you in a bad spot to rush something through that we could pass next week, if that gives you more time to figure things out. Are you good with this going through tonight?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, or to you, Mr. Mayor. This is extremely complicated. I think going into this discussion, my primary concern was that this discussion would interfere, or indeed any changes to the ordinance would interfere with the work that's ongoing with the Urban Forestry Task Force and master planning people. And this certainly puts a lot more pressure on people associated with that ongoing effort. I expect that we will have a draft report from our consultants associated with that effort in 3 months' time. And I think there'll be a lot more for us to think about at that point in time. And so, you can pass this tonight, and certainly we will make every effort to enforce it in accordance with your wishes. I do think that when we reflect on what will be provided to us by the Urban Forestry Task Force and master planning people, that we may think differently about where our concerns are. And so I guess I would like to have, we'd always like to have more time. We can be more diligent in terms of the regulations that we promulgate if we have more time. I think the bigger issue is that ultimately that we look at what's being proposed by the Urban Forestry Task Force and the master planning effort, and make changes in the spirit with which associated with that. So I'm not necessarily answering your question the way you want me to, or not the way you want me to.
I was hoping for a yes or no, Mr.
We can always do better when we have more time, and we have a lot going on.
I have Councillor Simmons, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Carlin. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up on what you had said earlier, and you've been around me longer, so you've heard me say it before. We can do the right thing the wrong way. And I have my own concerns. I understand, and I've heard from my colleagues who have specialized in this issue, the importance of protecting the tree canopy, and I get that. And I put right alongside that is also protecting people's rights. And so we want to be thoughtful and careful, But I'm concerned about notice. This is something that one of my colleagues has suggested that goes into force March 8th, sometimes I don't remember, less than 30 days. I don't know how we notify people adequately. And I remember, I've been here long enough to see us do a number of ordinances that have put us in a better place. And I use the smoking ordinance as one of those. And I remember it was very thoughtful. It was very, very difficult. We were very thoughtful about it. We put an advisory committee so people that had questions would have some place to go beyond and outside of a city staff so that they could grieve or get information. There's no time for any of that. That's not anywhere here. Although I do certainly appreciate the fact that we are holding harmless people in certain categories. I just don't think there's enough notice to people about this. We're going to do something for a year and not even give people a year's notice that we're going to do it. And so I'm just concerned about that. And I want please have my concerns noted. And as to asking Mr. O'Riordan, does he need more time? He's very eloquent, and he may not be a politician, but he knows how to answer a question politically. And so he's not going to say what he indeed needs, which is, he says 3 more months would be helpful in assessing, is this really where we want to be and where we want to go? You yourself, Mr. Mayor, says any other time, people would storm the Bastille if we try to do something this quickly. And so that's my concern, and I'll stand by this, and so that's why I will not vote to support it.
Thank you. I have Councilor Carlone and Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just bear with me for a moment. Scientists were talking about climate change in the 1970s. And reports came out in the 80s. I'm sure my fellow councilors across the way might have the specific dates. This is nothing new. The new element is the shock of the loss of the tree canopy, which the study has depicted. This is a short-term endeavor to have time to consider it and to modify what we're proposing. And so my question to the commissioner and the solicitor is, if in 3 months we come up with something, we say, boy, this is a good way to do things or to modify things, we should suggest it to the council, you would do that as soon as you could. So all we're talking about is making it better in time and saying there is a serious problem. This isn't zoning, and some zoning has been pushed through in one meeting, which is amazing to me. This is a matter of we're trying to protect the city, and we're losing trees left and right. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, we've lost a good amount of big trees. And so I'll be voting for this 100% with the intent of making it even better in 4 to 6 months. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Zondervan, followed by the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To follow on to Councilor Carlone's remarks, we've had reports of trees being cut down today. I have letters in my inbox from people saying, I'm going to cut down these trees because I don't trust this regulation will allow me to do it for the next year, so I'm going to do it now. So if we prolong the effective date beyond the 2 weeks that the commissioner needs to inform the citizens, we will be, in fact, losing even more trees. So we need to have the courage of our convictions. We've heard from the public. We've deliberated. We've come together on this being the temporary solution that we think is needed for the next year to protect our canopy while we await the recommendations from the task force so that we can make more permanent and more far-reaching changes to our protection ordinance for the trees. So I would caution us severely against trying to extend the timeline even further, because what we're doing is putting even more trees at risk. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I didn't hear Commissioner O'Riordan say that he wanted another 3 months. What I heard him say was that the task force process would hopefully complete its recommendations in about 3 months, and then we would have a set not only of policy recommendations to go into a more comprehensive ordinance and set of regulations, but also a full complement of strategies and programs, including, as people have mentioned, potentially some incentives, so that it's not only the stick that we're talking about now, which we're really using because we have reached this crisis point, and so we just need to take a deep breath, stop the sort of wanton, casual destruction of the canopy to give the task force time. And just to go back into the context of how the task force came to be, this isn't a sudden overnight realization in the last 2 months that we have a tree problem. The task force came into being because we recognized we had a lot of questions about what was happening with our tree canopy and our policies. I held a series of hearings last term. We asked for the task force to be formed. It was formed. They've started working. Members of that very task force have asked us to pass the set of ordinance changes and regulations that we're discussing tonight. So we have the support of task force members as, yes, this is a good stopgap solution. And I don't view it as by any means the final solution. I view it as a step along the way. And I agree that delaying its implementation only invites more of what we've seen. And it is horrifying. There are just trees being taken down all over the city, and it is mostly at this point connected with residential development, as well as various city projects, as well as trees that are being removed, large street trees, because of apparently deferred maintenance, which has left them vulnerable. I walked down Berkeley Street today and was shocked to see 2 very large street trees had been recently removed without any, any notice. I mean, we're losing trees right, left, and center. It's alarming. This set of amendments is not going to stop all tree loss, but it sends a very strong signal, and I fully support it. And I do appreciate the extra effort that DPW and all of the city staff and the city solicitor have put into making this happen, because we have asked for this, and it's not something that we just woke up and asked for a month ago. We've been asking for a long time how we can strengthen our ordinance. So thank you.
So let me be even more clear. I'm not saying that this conversation hasn't happened. The ordinance that is in front of us has had 2 meetings. Sure, there's a lot of things that have been discussed since the 70s, Councilor. But I'm saving the tape, is all I'm saying. Because many of the people who are saying this is an emergency, do this now, this is fast enough, and I'm talking about people in the public and in this room, are often the very same people who say more time, more time, more time. And I'm just saying, I'm just pointing it out. Pointing it out. Yes, it's been talked about for a long time, but this particular ordinance has had 2 meetings. So we're doing a citywide ordinance that's going to affect every property owner in the city after 2 meetings. Let's just make sure we understand that. And you know what? I may still vote for this, because at the end of the day, I think waiting a year to cut down a tree on your property isn't a huge inconvenience unless there is some, danger, and we've put some protections in there for it. But I just want to make sure, I wish we talked about other things with the passion that we're talking about this. I really do. And I've said it before. I can call a meeting to talk about homelessness or substance abuse, and I get 3 people. But we talk about trees being cut down, and it's the end of the world. And I'm not saying that because I don't love trees. I'm just saying, let's just move with this same speed when we're talking about human life as well. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to go back to something we discussed at the Ordinance Committee meeting, which was around staffing for the Department of Public Works to ensure that we can actually do what we're setting out to do here. And I was just reading the committee notes, and I don't see an actual answer on how many full-time staff you think we're going to need to hire to do this. And do we have the commitment from the city to actually hire staffing to ensure that we can staff this up?
The manager heard staffing and he just appeared
He just
out of
popped
nowhere.
out from the back.
It's amazing. It's like Beetlejuice, Mr. O'Riordan.
Mr. O'Riordan, or if you would like to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, I think I said at the last hearing that the Urban Forestry Division at the Department of Public Works is an extremely busy division in terms of the work that they're doing each and every day. And there's no question but that this adds more work to the amount of work that they do. And so the resources that we have at the moment are going to be challenged as a result of this. I cannot tell you at this point in time as to how many permits we're going to receive, how many times we're going to have to speak to residents around this issue, explain this, but I don't see it as being a small undertaking. And so I do think that our resources are stretched specific to the Urban Forestry Division. Yes.
Councillor Mellon.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, again, you answered a little politically when I was asking for a yes/no question. I am just going to go ahead and say we are probably going to need to hire at least one full-time staff person, especially as we discussed at the last Ordinance Committee meeting. You are actually not allowed on people's private property, right? And so there is going to need to be significant investigative work if somebody cuts down a tree. So I want to know right now, is the city committing to hiring a person in the Urban Forestry Division to actually do this work? Because if they're not, then I don't know what we're doing.
Mr. Manager. You are halfway home.
I almost made it. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I think what we would do is we're in the middle of our budget hearings right now, and there are many departments that are requesting additional positions. And as we've talked about, we take a look at what the council goals and priorities are, and we make sure we can carry them out. So if this becomes a council priority and it's passed, it's up to me to make sure we have the staffing to do it. So it'll all be looked at as part of the overall budget. We're in the budget now, but I'd really need to talk to the Public Works Commissioner to see what other areas of increases he's looking at, and then take a look at the whole picture. But we're certainly not going to do something that's been passed by the council because we don't put the staff on to do it. But again, that would work with all the other areas in the departments that we'd have to look at. So I know I'm not telling you, yes, we are, but obviously we would take a look at it as we do with all the departments. We've already, in the budgets that we've heard so far, probably added maybe 8 to 10 positions, all based on initiatives that the council feel are important, and we've recognized that when we meet with the department head. So this would be another one that we would have a discussion. I'm sure Owen has other positions he wants to talk about. I know he does, and then we'll set a priority. But obviously, I think one of the things that we've tried to commit, certainly since I've been city manager, is as new initiatives come up to make sure we have the staff to input them, make sure they work.
Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, for answering that question. I also wanted to speak to something that a couple of people who emailed us and some people that came to public comment, and I just want us all to really be thinking about, is that we need to be providing incentives for people to be actually planting trees. And whether those, I wrote a couple of them down, whether that's providing at-cost trees to residents through a program, whether that's, we actually got a whole email from someone who listed 10 or 12 different incentives that we could be really looking at. And I think we should probably take those forward and think about ways to incentivize. If we're going to do this tonight, we also should be thinking about how to plant more trees and where to plant them. And then lastly, I just want to go back to what the mayor pretty eloquently said I feel like we've been talking about the loss of the tree canopy in this chamber for months at every single meeting. And I hope that once this is over, we can really talk about how we're losing the socioeconomic diversity of this city and treat it every bit of the emergency that we have treated this tree canopy loss. I hope people are as passionate, both in this chamber and in here and out in the community, when we start talking about affordable housing and tenant displacement protections. It's also an emergency, and we have moved quickly on this, and we have shown that we can move quickly. I am really looking for everyone to be as passionate about those really critical issues for our vulnerable populations as we have been talking about the tree canopy protection. It's very hard for me, having come here and wanting to do a lot of things to protect our vulnerable residents, to be spending this much time and energy on this one thing. So I'm really looking for a commitment from this council and from our community to really be passionate about these other critical issues as well.
Thank you. I have Councilor Carlone.
I just have to say I concur, and I would expect just about everybody in this room concurs with that statement. I came here 5 years ago to do what you're talking about, so please add 4 years of frustration to how you're feeling now. It doesn't diminish the importance of what we're talking about. I agree. As far as homelessness, I think it's a disgrace that we don't build housing for the homeless, more housing. But that's not the subject before us. But this is one step, and yes, we have many more steps, and each of us have been talking to other officials in the city about getting more money to do things. It's not just you, Counselor, it's everybody feels that way, or at least most people do. And I hope you push it, because I'll be pushing it too, and I know others around us will be pushing it. So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you to my colleague and all my colleagues, I am as deeply committed to those issues as you are, and I have shown that, and I will continue to show that. And there's no lack of concern for people here. When we talk about tree canopy protection, that's because people need trees. It's not because we care about the trees in some abstract way that's separate from the people who depend on them for their very lives. So I think all of these issues are related, they're all connected, and I think we all are very passionate about working on them so that we have the best possible city. I really want to thank my colleagues for working on this issue, and it's been a very collaborative and productive conversation, I think. So I hope that we can vote on it tonight, and then we can put the issue to rest for 3 months, and then we'll get the recommendations from the task force, and we'll spend some more time on this issue, and hopefully in those 3 months we can make similar accomplishments in some of these other issues that we're all concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Councilor Tim, you haven't spoken yet, and then Councilor Siddiqui.
Are we going to vote on the ordination now, or is that?
I think Councilor Siddiqui wants to make some comments. Did you want to say anything before?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it really pains me to have to vote against this ordinance as the way it's presented here this evening. And just want to remind everyone that on, let's see, what was the date? August 7, 2017, I submitted a policy order that the city manager be and hereby is requested to confer with the city solicitor and the city arborist with a view in mind of drafting appropriate language for an ordinance that would require a public hearing before the ordinance committee or any other appropriate department before the removal of 4 or more trees from private property. So I have been talking about that in 2017, and I would probably vote for it if that was the language here tonight. But the language here tonight is to if one tree, a private owner unwittingly removes is going to be penalized tremendously. And I just have an issue with that. But, this was in 2007, August 2017, about 4 more on private property. So, I don't want people to perceive this, that, this vote is against the tree canopy. We want to spend $20, $30 million to plant trees throughout the city. We have the money, we have the resources, let's just do it. I have no problem at all spending that money. But I'm concerned about this is going to put neighbors against neighbors, people in other people's backyards looking to see what's going on, and it's just going to cause a lot of friction. One tree could cause, severely damaged. And quite honestly, you look at the process here from A to E, that's probably about 2 weeks worth before the property owner would have permission to remove that tree. That could be a danger to the residents or into anybody else. So government sometimes gets in the way. So minimum, I feel that there's going to take 2 weeks for that whole process between. We saw the high winds today. I saw a lot of trees that were knocked down today. So if someone's got a tree that is knocked over in the backyard, is now a dangerous situation against the property, it just, to me, this is just too punitive as far as I'm concerned. When I bought the house next door to me, it was a blacktop, yard. I ripped out all that up. I put in grass. I put in this huge fern tree and all kinds of bushes. So I have been in the forefront of this type of environmental change and what we have to do to protect the earth. But I just think that this ordinance as proposed is just going to be very detrimental to an innocent property owner who is just going to be attacked by, removing a tree. And I just think this is not the way to do it. And if it was an ordinance that said, that it was like 3 trees on a private property or 4 trees or more, then definitely they should have permission. And I proposed that in 2017, on 4 or more trees from private property. So, but I will be voting against this as it is written tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I wanted to thank the Commissioner for all the work that you've done, and you've still been able to respond to, mundane matters such as trash replacement on Saturday morning. So you continue to really set the standard for the departments, and I very much appreciate what you've done. I echo what the mayor is saying. I am been supportive on this issue, and I am supportive on this issue. I am concerned about making policy that at the end of the day isn't enforceable or is very difficult to enforce, as much as it in theory I stand for what it stands for. And so this is this difficult tension, and I'm struggling with it. I really appreciate the amendments that my colleagues have made at the ordinance meeting on February 14th as they relate to excluding certain individuals who can't pay the fee, and the current amendment we made today. And I feel okay about those amendments. I think thinking about the next 2 weeks and the notice we give, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that come up from folks as well. And thinking about how, as a city, we're going to respond to those questions and the additional capacity there of, what do we do when there's so many questions that this is put through, and how do we respond to that? Whether that's a community meeting that I hate to ask that Owen or the commissioner organizes, right? Maybe Quentin should, but the capacity piece is something to think about. So this is difficult. It's helpful to hear from my colleagues on this issue. I'm struggling with it. I think there's a lot to be said if this moves forward and how it is enforced, and if this is actually will prevent canopy loss. And so that's a major concern of mine. So I appreciate the discussion. This is this is a difficult one. Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. Hearing nothing more. Roll call.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Simmons.
Would you please have the clerk inform us and those that might be viewing it exactly what we're voting on and what the outcome will be if it passes?
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Simmons. The council will be voting to pass to be ordained the amendment to the tree protection that is dated 2/25, as has been amended by Councilor Kelly tonight. So the effective date of this would be March 11th.
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
Councilor Simmons.
to our clerk. You said we are voting the amendment? I thought we were voting for ordination, or we were voting
We're voting
amendment and then ordination,
No,
or the
we're voting-
order as amended? I just want to be clear.
As amended.
We're voting
This
to
vote
ordain the text that you have that's dated 2/25
as amended.
as amended by Councilor Kelly.
Thank you.
Roll call.
Councilor Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly. Yes. Councilor Mallon.
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Councilor Simmons.
No.
Councilor Toomey.
No.
Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the proposed amendment is passed to be ordained as amended by an affirmative vote with 7 in favor and 2 recorded in the negative.
Okay. We now move on to calendar items. Council. On placing the committee report on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to calendar items. Councilor Mallon.
I move suspension of the rules to bring forward a late communications and report from other city officers.
Pertaining to number 1, calendar item number 1.
Yep.
On suspension to bring forward a late communication from other city officers, referring to calendar item number 1. On suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On bringing forward late communication from other city officers, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to bring forward this certified arborist letter from Maltby and Company that was submitted to the council on February 7th that I brought up at a previous council meeting that it doesn't seem like anyone either made the connection that it was the Vineyard Street property for the curb cut, but the certified arborist letter does indicate that the tree that's in question, that's been put forward for the curb cut, has a dead central leader and other dead branches at the top of the tree, which indicates that the tree is declining. In addition, this tree has some mechanical damage on the trunk and root flare, as well as a very limited area to grow in. And in his opinion, this tree is a candidate for removal, and he attached photos. Unfortunately, we placed this on the calendar. Councilor Zondervan placed this on the calendar, I think, to get to tonight's meeting to see what would happen at the tree moratorium. The tree was taken down by the property owner based on this arborist letter, so I wanted to move forward and see if we could vote on the curb cut so as not to hold up their project any longer. I do feel strongly that this particular owner had followed all of the procedures that were put into place. Nothing existed on our ordinance until tonight that would require a permit or anything to remove a tree. So I understand that we have delayed this process, hopefully to get to tonight and perhaps implicate it. But I do think that we need to move forward and at least vote on this curb cut, given that this project is moving forward, and we should at least vote on it based on the fact that we have a certified arborist letter and we had one 2 weeks ago.
Sorry, Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to my colleague, I do want to be clear that placing this on the table had nothing to do with tonight's vote. And in fact, when we voted to place it on the table, we had no reason to believe that we would be voting on these amendments tonight, because we hadn't even had the second ordinance committee hearing yet. The reason we placed this on the table was because we wanted the vice mayor to be able to opine on it, and also we had requested from DPW whether the tree in question should be considered a public tree or not, given that it was at least partially in the public way. So we have unfortunately not received an answer to that question. I also want to dispute the claim that all procedures have been followed. The application that's before us has in all capital bold letters across the front, you do not have permission to begin construction until the curb cut has been issued. I have personally inspected the property, as has the vice mayor. Several trees have been removed. All kinds of preparatory work has been done in apparent anticipation of us approving this curb cut. So I don't agree that proper procedures have been followed. The proper way to do this is to apply for the curb cut and let us know which trees are to be removed, and then after we have approved it, to remove those trees and begin the work that was contemplated, and that is not how this went. So I am not voting yes on this curb cut if we vote on it tonight.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I don't intend to opine. I think Councillor Zondervan has probably said about as much as needs to be said. However, no one has ever addressed whether this curb cut is actually needed for this project, and I continue to believe that it is not needed, as there is an existing curb cut that can be used to park 2 cars, and there will eventually be 2 units on this property. So the luxury of having a second curb cut off of Vineyard Street is a luxury. It's also extremely close to the lot line of the house next door on Vineyard Street, and quite honestly, I think they can live without it, and given the preemptory removal of the tree that was partially in the public way, as well as 3 other large significant trees, which granted there was no ordinance in existence to prevent that, I think shows at least some bad faith, and I won't vote in favor of what I consider to be an optional curb cut. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor, thank you for bringing up this letter that was, I guess we missed it at the last meeting, because for me, what I remember part of the discussion was there was this decision about whether or not this was a shade tree, and we were trying to get some kind of legal opinion about the state, statute and whether this qualified or not, and then not knowing that the tree was dead, and my fault for not seeing, for not looking at that. And I heard that they had cut down the tree while this was still we were still waiting for some information. To be quite honest, I was livid because it was, at least based on that information that I had at that point, it seemed like a complete disrespect for this council wanting to get more information. And I was quite bothered by it and prepared to not vote for this because I felt that, they did act in bad faith. Turns out that February 3rd, I think the letter says, it was a letter dated February 3rd that the arborist did say the tree was dead and could and should come down. So in that regard, I guess that decision was made prior to February 7th, to this coming up. So,
Mr. Mayor, when you're finished, may I?
Yeah. So, I guess now the question is just on the curb cut itself and not so much about the tree. So let me go to Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Well, the arborist said the tree was declining. He did not pronounce it dead. He said it had a dead central leader and some dead branches. I think, although there's no ISA level 2 rating with this arborist's opinion, I think there is reason to believe that that tree, if appropriately pruned and cared for, could have continued to live. So I don't see this as a death sentence. I see this as a candidate for removal, but not necessarily an emergency. You need to remove this tree right now. So I think, reasonable minds can differ, perhaps.
Thank you. Councilor Carlin, did you have your hand up, or you just, Councilor Carlin?
This is a tough decision. Every home has the right to a curb cut, assuming it's done properly, and I understand there'll be 2 homes here. The last time I was concerned, in addition to the issues that have been raised, because the site plan was not copied correctly, and all we saw was May Street, which really confused me because the address was 32 Vineyard. And now I see in the package there is the site plan, which shows the proposed driveway in the lower right-hand corner and the existing driveway of sorts in the upper left-hand corner of the site. I hate the way the tree was taken down, and it struck me as sort of the prototypical, perhaps unintended developer way of doing things. You're not going to give me what I want, I'll just do it. I can get away with it. And on the other hand, I have to balance it with what appears to be, and what I'm assuming will be a decent site plan with another structure built in the yard with its own driveway. So it will look, depending on the design of the building, as if it had always been that way. It appears that they're putting the driveway, the 5 feet, excuse me, plus, I can't read it, away from the property line and putting it next to the house, which is appropriate. So having seen the whole package, including the arborist's letter, although I agree with the Vice Mayor, this is not enough if the ordinance were in fact in place, I probably will be voting to proceed.
Okay, so the clerk has just whispered in my ear some procedural things, as she often does. Okay, we'll get to it after Councilor Kelly's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is no absolute right to a curb cut. And in an opinion from the city solicitor, this is dated Feb. 1, 1996, the solicitor cites a variety of different cases and basically says we have the ability to restrict people's access to the land via curb cuts if it's reasonable for a variety of different reasons. So reasonable is this vague term that doesn't have a lot of quantifiable aspects to it, but we shouldn't feel that simply because someone owns property and asks for a curb cut that they automatically should get one. I'm generally in the habit of thinking the less parking eventually we have, the happier we'll wind up being when it comes to curb cuts. So I will vote no on this, but no one should feel an obligation under the law to vote yes.
I'm just amazed that you pulled out our solicitor's report from 1996. You have like a magic hat or something over there. So what we need to do procedurally is we need to place the late communication on file. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Now we need 5 votes to actually pull this application off the table. I don't need to roll call it, right? All those in favor of pulling this application off the table say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
I'm voting no.
So I have 2 noes. Okay, so it passes. This is pulled off the table. Now we vote on calendar item number 1. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
No.
Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Zondervan, and Councilor Kelly are noes. The application passes. We now move on to any unfinished business. Anyone pulling anything else? That's it. All right. We move to applications and petitions. Pleasure of the council. Going to pull anything? Nope. On adopting.
Mr. Mayor, in referring I think it's application 4 on the noise ordinance to the ordinance committee.
Yeah. So on adopting 1 through 3 and referring number 4 to the ordinance committee for a hearing, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to communications on a motion by Councilor Simmons.
Mr. Mayor, can I pull a communication?
You certainly can.
Number 5, please.
On the balance, placing the balance on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move back to communication number 5. A communication was received from Francis Donovan, presiding officer, Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association, 42 Irving Street, regarding amending the language of Council Order 02 of October 29th, 2018. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak to this quickly because we did not get a chance to talk about this last week, but I wanted to assure Mr. Donovan of the Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Association that I did speak with Taha Jennings in the city manager's office to make the changes that he suggested actually prior to the last meeting that we had, because I noticed that there was 2 neighborhood groups that were left off, and that also that you and I had, I think, amended the order to include all of Mid-Cambridge to searching for a site, not just that one site. So we did not speak to it at the meeting necessarily, but I did speak with Taha Jennings in the city manager's office to address these specifically, and I wanted people to put their minds at rest.
Thank you. On placing the communication on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Move to resolutions. On a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring forward resolutions 1 through 9, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 5, please.
We have to pull any other resolutions?
7.
7?
7 and I lost the other one.
I'm sorry. Councilor Simmons, I'm sorry. You said 7?
2 and 7.
2 and 7?
Yes.
On the balance, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We go back to number 2. Welcome Pastor Jaron Green to his new role as the interim pastor of the Union Baptist Church. Councilor Simmons.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to take this time to, although he's not here, for the record, to formally acknowledge and welcome Pastor Jaron Green to Cambridge. I had the opportunity to meet with him, and he's an extraordinary young man with a lot of energy, and I look forward to his participation in various and sundry things here in Cambridge, particularly, which we seem to have missed when he wrote his brief description of him and his work, his interest in long time working in the area of housing. And so we had a really wonderful conversation with him. He has a lot of great ideas, and he's glad to be in Cambridge, and I'm glad that the Union Baptist had the foresight and insight to bring him to Cambridge to be as a part of our community.
Thank you, Councilor Simmons. On resolution number 2, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Resolution number 5, a resolution on the death of Paula Sharaga. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, I'd like to add Councilor Devereaux to this resolution so we can vote on that at the end. Paula was a personal friend of mine, and it's always difficult losing friends. But in her case, she was really a special person, and I just want to make sure that we recognize that. She was a very passionate advocate for peace, for trees, for climate change, for children. She worked as a children's librarian in Brookline, and it will be fondly remembered by many children, and now some who have already become adults. I met Paula years ago working on tree preservation and climate change advocacy here in Cambridge. But after she passed away, I went back and read some of her emails that she sent to me, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that after I was elected, she was lobbying me and some of us on a particular issue, and she's very passionate, and so she was very adamant about her issue. But then she sent me a follow-up email, and she said, I know how difficult this has been, and just really wanted to acknowledge that. And she was always very, somebody said this at the Ghost Bike ceremony for her yesterday. She was always very passionate and compassionate. And she was always aware of the fact that we're all human, and that how we treat each other really matters. So she will be deeply missed by our community. And of course, I would be remiss not to mention that the way she died is also very important to us, in that she was the third traffic fatality in the Boston area in the last year, resulting from a large truck. And we've talked about truck safety for years, and again, it's one of those situations where we are losing our friends and neighbors, and we need to take action. Some of it, maybe most of it, has to be done at the state level, but even so, we can add our voices and contribute to that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. On amending the resolution to add Vice Mayor Devereaux, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On adoption, making unanimous upon adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to resolution number 7, appreciation for Red Mitchell. Councilor Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, of course, whereas tonight is the last evening for Black History Month in terms of celebration, the last Monday night of the council meeting, not the last day of Black History Month, I thought it would be fitting to acknowledge a very good friend and someone who has made Cambridge his own. And if anyone who's had the distinct pleasure of speaking to him, a walking historian in its own right, or griot, as we would say, I wanted to acknowledge the fine work of Mr. Mitchell, and I'm going to take a moment to read the order. Now, first of all, I was supposed to be surprising him with this. Of course, he surprises me by going to a Masonic event, but, we'll plan something where we can present this to him formally. But as tonight is the final city council meeting to take place during this year's Black History Month observance, I should say, it is a fitting moment to recognize one of our own who has made a true difference in the world around him. And just so for folks know that Mr. Mitchell is a Cambridge resident, and that whereas Mr. Mitchell, who at the age of 91 continues to have more energy, enthusiasm, and passion for life, and has packed several decades of good work following this resolution that only speaks to a tiny portion of that life. And whereas R.T. Mitchell enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1946, so for those of you who don't know, he fought in World War II. Here it is. Was stationed in Germany as a medic until 1950. And it also doesn't say while he was there he learned to speak Polish and German. And after his honorable discharge, he earned his Bachelor of Arts at Duquesne University. And what it also doesn't say is that he came here in Cambridge in the 50s and played against Harvard on the tennis team as the only black member of the Duquesne tennis team. I tell him he keeps all these secrets to himself. And whereas as he worked his way up in the insurance world, R.T. Mitchell served as an agency director of the Wright Mutual Insurance Company in Detroit. What an agency director is like the vice president. So he was the vice president of one of the largest Black-owned, not the largest, but one of the largest owned Black-owned insurance companies, which was located in Detroit, Michigan. He was later placed in charge of sales and management of the Supreme Life Company, which was the largest owned insurance company in North Chicago. And then in the mid-'70s, he made his way to Massachusetts. And whereas due to Red T. Mitchell's tireless work ethic, his tremendous knowledge of the insurance business, his commitment to helping people plan to have a financial safety net, he was hired as a staff manager in sales management at John Hancock's Boston office. This is right after the large Hancock building was built and the windows were falling out of it all the time. That was the building he was in. He was then also the first person of color to have this executive role. Whereas Red T. Mitchell would go on to help start his own local focused insurance business in Cambridge in the early 80s, and later would serve as a site manager for Meals on Wheels when he would later be working out in Plainfield, Mass. And he was also an employee of Hess Company Elder Services. And whereas the accomplishment for which Mr. Mitchell is most known, however, is his lead role in successfully pushing for the establishment of a monument to early abolitionist and Mason and freedom fighter Prince Hall, and I've added founding father, because Mr. Mitchell has always said over and over again, had Prince Hall not been enslaved, had Prince Hall not been marginalized in so many ways, his role in the 1770s was equal to the founding fathers, who we still honor and acknowledge to this day. This monument, which was placed upon the historic Cambridge Common in 2010, is the first statue of its kind in the United States. And whereas without Red T. Mitchell's advocacy, enthusiasm, and constant prodding the project along, the Prince Hall Monument likely would not have been realized. And this project has fit into Mr. Mitchell's continued endeavors to ensure that Prince Hall's role in shaping this country's early years and the ripple effects still felt from his life are properly recognized. And whereas Red T. Mitchell tirelessly campaigned to restore Prince Hall to his rightful place in our country's history, his many works of compassion via his work with seniors and through his work selling insurance and his quiet example of always spreading kindness and civility to those around him are qualities that should rightfully be recognized and honored. It is only fitting that they be recognized and honored at this evening's meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council go on record in appreciating the exemplary works, deeds, and continuing examples of Red T. Mitchell, and be it further resolved that I chase him down to give him a suitably engrossed copy of this resolution on behalf of the entire City Council. So again, this order just begins to talk about the breadth and depth of the work Mr. Mitchell has done. He's the Grand Lecturer. I don't know if, for those of you that understand Masonic traditions, being the Grand Lecturer is a very prominent position in the community of Masons. He continues to go to scads of meetings. He was invited just last year to be the speaker at the Senior Center's Black History event. He's very sought after because of all the information that he knows around Prince Hall Masonry in particular, but Black history or African American history in general. So I just stand here offering this resolution, which I hope my colleagues will join me in adopting and then presenting it to Mr. Mitchell at an appropriate time.
Thank you.
I yield the floor.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleague for bringing this forward. I've gotten to know Mr. Mitchell over the last year or so, and I had the pleasure of having breakfast with him at the Martin Luther King Memorial event, and he is absolutely a gem. So I'm really glad to be voting for this.
Thank you.
On adoption, making unanimous upon adoption, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to policy orders on a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring policy orders before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Policy order list is before us. Pleasure of the Council. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 15.
15. Pleasure of the Council. Councilor Kelly.
Number 6 and 14, please.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Siddiqui.
Number, excuse me, it is number, there's so many, 13. Thank you.
Pleasure of the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Number 1, 2, and 9, please.
Mr. Mayor.
Who said that? Councilor Mallon.
Number 5, please.
Pleasure of the council. Anything further? Councilor Carlone.
Number 3.
Pleasure of the council. On the balance, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move back to policy order number 1, City Council's opposition to the MBTA fare increase proposal. This was filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Siddiqui, and Councilor Mallon. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, this has gotten quite a lot of press recently, including an article in today's Globe about the proposed fare increase, which would take effect on July 1st of this year. And it would increase the average fare by 6.3%. And there are a lot of very good questions being asked about whether this is the right signal to send riders of public transit, because every time we increase the fare, and we've increased them several times over the last several years, it's demonstrated to erode ridership. And at this point in our history, with climate change and all of the focus on trying to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and into public transit, it just doesn't seem like the right signal to be sending. In addition, fare increases are, by nature regressive, and there are people who do not have the choice to drive the car they own and are, stuck with riding the T, whose service is recognized to be suboptimal on many routes. So there is a public meeting tomorrow night from 6 to 8 p.m. at the main library. The MBTA will be there to hear comments about its Better Bus project, and also to hear comments about the proposed fare increase. And public comment is being taken through February 28th. So I would encourage members of the public, if they have an opinion on this, to let the MBTA know. There is also an online petition that was started by Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu, which you can find on Facebook and on her Twitter page and various other places if you Google it, expressing opposition to the proposed fare increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'll just weigh in here that what we should really be doing is funding public transit based on private vehicles and not based on the backs of the working and middle class transit riders. So this is absolutely the wrong direction for us to be going, as the Vice Mayor said. So I hope that people will, in addition to voting for this, will weigh in through public comment and really let the MBTA know that this is the wrong way to go.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
I'm sorry. I also wanted to make a small amendment to ask that a copy of this resolution be sent to our state delegation, as well as to the MBTA's Fiscal Management and Control Board and Governor Baker, as it says in the order. So just if the clerk could add, and to the Cambridge's delegation at the State House, that would be great. Thank you.
On the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On the order as amended, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to policy order number 2, City Council's support of Clean Vehicle Transitions Bill, filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Siddiqui, Councilor Zondervan. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Again, just briefly, this expresses support for two bills at the state, both of which were sponsored by members of our delegation. So we are very fortunate to have them so closely aligned with our values. Each of these bills would help us transition both our buses, electric buses, and that would be both MBTA buses and school buses by 2035. And the second bill would look at fleets, both public and private, of vehicles of over 25 vehicles, and ask that they transition by 2035 to zero emissions vehicles. Cities all over the world are doing this even sooner than 2035. And I think these are both excellent bills for us to be on record supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 3, that the city manager is requested to confer with the Community Development Department on a process for establishing a formal, thorough review of the city's affordable home ownership programs, incorporating a plan for obtaining and analyzing substantial quantitative data inclusive of all types of units. This was filed by Councilor Siddiqui, Councilor Simmons, myself, and Councilor Toomey. It was pulled by Councilor Carlone. We've been practicing going to the lead sponsor first. Councilor Siddiqui, do you want to comment on this first or yield?
I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you. I fully support, obviously, the intent of this and the wording of it. It dawned on me that we've all heard about the quality of construction in a lot of the new buildings where we have inclusionary housing or home ownership programs. And it might not be relevant here because the basis of attachment A is in one direction, and I just thought, why not, if you're asking people questions, why not ask what they think of the quality of units, the sense of community, all the other issues that really make a neighborhood. And I'm willing to just forego that if that keeps it simpler. But it seems to me we heard tonight from somebody on Harvard Street that the building is in terrible shape. I think it's 8 years old. And we've all heard from other people. Just last week I heard from another person who just couldn't believe where she moved to, even though she's grateful to have a roof over her. And I think this is an issue that eventually has to be discussed. But I'll forego it for now. I understand the intent. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Siddiqui.
Yeah, the attachment A is meant for suggestions, and so I'm happy as a follow-up when I speak to CDD to mention some of these additional questions.
Thank you. Pleasure of the council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 5, that the city manager is requested to confer with the appropriate city departments to discuss the feasibility of allowing small businesses to host live acoustic music performances without a license, and if feasible, present the city council with a proposal to allow such performances. This was filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Mallon, and myself. Pulled by Councilor Mallon. Vice Mayor, you're the lead sponsor. Do you want to go first?
I'll let Councilor Mallon
Councilor Mallon.
I was just going to say one thing, was that this is the second time. I just want to reiterate, this is the second time that I've suggested this, and I think...
It sounded vaguely familiar because we put this forward a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so it's deja vu all over again, but now that the Arts Task Force exists, I'll defer to Councilor Mallon to talk about what they discussed there.
Thank you. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Vice Mayor for putting this in 2 years ago. I think this is something that we should definitely be looking at and trying to figure out ways to mitigate some of the barriers for some of our artists and musicians here in Cambridge. We have been making great strides here at this council and also on the task force. And I was excited to see that this actually had been put in 2 years ago, because our next Arts Task Force meeting is actually on licensing and permitting as it relates to the arts. And I've had a few meetings with some artists and some musicians talking about our fees and our permitting process and how it can make it really difficult here in Cambridge. And so it makes them look elsewhere to do their performances or to set up shop. We did receive an email from Jason Alves and Michael Monestein, the executive directors of the Central Square Business Association and the East Cambridge Business Association, asking us to really look hard at a lot of our fees. I have a fee schedule for our current entertainment license, and it contains a lot of things. So, really looking at trying to figure out, if you want a live band or acoustical music, you pay $500 a year. If you want a light show, you pay another $500 a year. If people are going to dance, people who are patrons are going to dance to that acoustical or live band music, you have to pay another $500 fee. So, all told, those $500 can add up very quickly, particularly if you're doing multiple things. So this conversation that we're going to be having at the Arts Task Force meeting is going to be important. But I think that this is a great way to kind of kickstart this conversation and really take it up through the Arts Task Force. And this isn't the last time we're going to be talking about fees as it relates to arts and musicians. And I think we really do need to be looking at these fees in a very holistic way and talking with artists and musicians and small business owners around what could be done holistically and interdepartmentally to really clear some of these hurdles for some of the folks we really want here in Cambridge and we really want to be performing. And if we're being intentional about creating a space for artists and musicians, this is a step in the right direction.
Thank you. I'll just quickly, when you talk about fees and some of the work that's been done, I was on the corner of Brookline and Mass Ave and Central Square the other night, and there were three young men who were rapping, and when they saw me, he went into a freestyle rap thanking the city council for doing away with the permitting fees for buskers, and so it was quite impressive that he could do that off the top of his head, so that was pretty cool. So with that, if there's nothing further on adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to policy order number 6, that the city manager is requested to confer with the election commission and other relevant city staff on the feasibility of creating a new polling location on Cambridge Park Drive for the 2019 municipal election to better serve the many voters who live in this rapidly growing area, filed by Councilor Kelly, Councilor Carlone, Councilor Siddiqui, Councilor Zondervan. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we got a very detailed answer from the former chair of the Election Commission, so I would ask for unanimous consent to withdraw this.
Councilor Kelly is asking for unanimous consent to withdraw this policy order. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and it is so withdrawn. We move to policy order number 9, City Council support of Retirement Fund Fossil Fuel Divestment Bill, filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Zondervan, Councilor Carlone, pulled by the Vice Mayor, and Vice Mayor is the lead sponsor.
Thank you. This, again, is something that we have already voted on. I'm just going back through and making sure that we do everything 2 or 3 times. But what prompted it is that the state has a bill before it that would, and it's sponsored by Representative Jay Livingstone, among others, that would give cities the authority, which we have lacked up until now, to make these decisions about whether our retirement boards should be having any holdings in fossil fuel stocks. So this just expresses the fact that Cambridge has already voted twice unanimously to divest and been thwarted each time. So we would like to see this state bill pass. Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay, and it is adopted. We move to policy order number 13, that the city manager be and hereby is requested to confer with the Economic Development Department on expediting zoning based on the 2015 commercial land use classification study and exploring the feasibility of hiring more zoning planners. This was filed by Councilor Siddiqui, Councilor Mallon, Councilor Zondervan, and Councilor Carlone. Councilor Siddiqui, you're the lead sponsor, and you pulled this order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to say that we had a great meeting on February 13th about this issue. I think what struck me is the fact that the study was completed in July of 2015, and it's almost 5 years. So what does that mean when our city can't act or is not acting on work that we've asked for? And it's difficult. And what we heard from Jeff, our seemingly only person who's working on zoning, is that it is a capacity issue. And I think it's also to find folks like him who are like-minded, that's been difficult. But I don't think that's a good enough excuse. And while I appreciate all the work that our city is doing, we have to figure out a way to work on the things that we've asked for and put them and execute on them. And some of these things, it seems, are less complicated than we're making them out to be. And so, I think that we have to do whatever we can to push these recommendations forward, because there has been ample discussion. The recommendations are very clear. And so I think once this order is in, and we've had many orders from the committee that have been building on this topic, this will help our small businesses. We know it will. And so it is kind of mind-boggling why it has taken this long. So I would appreciate the support of my colleagues, and hopefully I would love to see this before the 5-year mark, or some zoning before the 5-year mark hits us and the summer meeting is upon us. And so that's why this committee is pushing it. So thank you.
Pleasure of the council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 14, that the city manager is requested to provide the city council with information regarding accessory dwelling units. It's filed by Councilor Carlone and Councilor Siddiqui, pulled by Councilor Kelly. Councilor Carlone, do you want to yield or?
No, I'd like to give an introduction, if I might.
Go for it.
The questions before you are verbatim from the meeting notes. Madam Clerk notified me that during the meeting I had not asked for a vote to make this policy order. So all we're doing is coming back and saying, this is what we discussed, and this is what we want to ask the city to provide before the next meeting. Councilor Kelly, my co-chair, obviously is the proponent for ADUs, which also I support, and he might want to modify that, and I'm certainly open to that. Thank you.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't want to modify it necessarily, but I propose the changes to the ADU ordinance simply to, with the exception of the freestanding existing garages, but as far as the parking in the GFA and the lot size, it was simply to allow people to do ADUs in a way that the council had already approved, but they now need current variances. And somehow that discussion morphed into something that was completely not what I was anticipating, which was about, should they be owner-occupied? How does it impact affordable housing? What's the impact on short-term rentals? And the list went on. And I think those are all fine things to discuss, but I think those can happen independent of simply changing the zoning to allow what we voted on over a year ago to go forward without a need for variances, as is the case now for a variety of people, because so many lots are non-conforming. If we want to take the pre-existing garages out, because that's a new twist, we can do that at the ordinance meeting. So a fine discussion to be had. I just want to clarify that we're hoping to move ahead with the ordinance discussion independent of how quickly some of these answers come back.
Vice Mayor.
Oh, and I think we heard during public comment that on bullet point 2, the question about owner occupancy and whether it affects the title in a sale, I think we heard pretty clearly from Heather Hoffman that a zoning does not affect title. So I don't know if we need to really answer that. It's fine to keep it in the list, but she seemed pretty adamant that that was not a question we should be asking.
If I might just comment on that, Mr.
Councilor
Mayor.
Carlin.
I'd rather the solicitor say that, and I concur. I'm sure Heather knows what she's talking about. But again, these were the questions, pardon me, these were the questions raised by 4 different counselors, I believe, and I want to be faithful to those requests for more information. I don't want it to delay the discussion, and I understand my co-chairs wanting to move forward, and by doing this, at least we can push getting answers on this as quickly as possible. Not doing this, it might actually delay it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. Pleasure of the council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to Policy Order 15, City Council participation as a distinct governmental member to enable voting on the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. This was filed by Councilor Zondervan and pulled by Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll ask for 2 amendments, but first, I just want to make sure that everybody understands what this is all about. The International Energy Codes Coalition sets the basic energy codes really for the entire world. And Massachusetts bases its energy codes on those codes. And then, of course, Cambridge can adopt a stretch code, which can sometimes be even more energy efficient. So one of the interesting things that I learned about all this is that we have thousands of eligible officials in the state of Massachusetts who could vote on this code, but the last time only 400 officials in Massachusetts actually voted. And part of the reason is that people didn't know that we could register multiple entities within our government to vote on these energy codes. The other thing that's changed is that the voting is now online, which makes it a lot easier. Previously, one had to go and vote in person. So because of all that, it's actually possible for us as a city council to register as a government member and to vote on these energy codes. And both the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, MAPC, as well as the Massachusetts Climate Action Network, MCAN, will provide us with all the guidance and information that we would need to be informed voters. So, provided that my colleagues agree that it is worthwhile for us to participate, the only thing we would need to do is designate one of us to register the council, and I'm offering to be that person. And then we could register up to 8 of us to vote on these energy codes. So that's the only minor wrinkle, is that one of us at least would have to sit out. So 2 amendments would be to, first of all, add Councilor Devereaux as a co-sponsor, and then Vice Mayor, Devereaux to the...
I let the first one go, Vice Mayor, but I...
Thank you for that correction. And then to the ordered, we would amend it to actually designate the individual councilor who would register this body. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has before we make that decision.
Councilor Mellon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to my colleague. So I have a lot of questions about this, but first and foremost, that the last order is that the City Council authorize the designee to pay the $240 fee and register the City Council as a government member. Where are the funds coming from for this $240?
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. So we have a budget as a council to join organizations like the Massachusetts Municipal Association and to participate in their events. So I've spoken with Naomi about this, and this would be coming out of that budget, and that's perfectly applicable in terms of what we use that budget for.
And is it an annual fee or is it just a one-time fee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's just a one-time fee to register to vote on these 2021 codes.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to my colleague, do we know who from the city manager's office will be registering up to 8 staff members? Do we know who those staff members are at this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have inquired with Suzanne Rasmussen at the Community Development Department, and so they are still figuring that out, and I believe they could actually register even more than 8 people, but again, because previously they would have to travel, they may have registered only 8 people. So I think they're still formulating that, but that's independent of our decision to register as a body and to register up to 8 of us to vote.
And one more question, Mr. Chair, through you. So you mentioned travel. Is there travel involved?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not anymore, because we are now able to vote online. So the MAPC, I spoke with Cammie Peterson there, has offered to assist us in even going so far as to come to the council and guide us through the voting process. The voting would take place in November, so that's a long time from now.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Mellon. Councilor Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleague for his ingenuity on this. The only question I would have, and because I like the idea, or I acknowledge the idea that the IECC rules, per the IEC, whatever, the Cambridge City Council could register by March 29th and participate as a distinct governmental member. Just for going forward and for continuity, if it's important enough to do, it's important to have continuity. I would think it'd be more appropriate, although thank you for putting yourself out front, that the mayor be the lead person, because the mayor can't appoint committees, but the city manager appoints committees all over the city. The mayor just has special authority to appoint special committees, and we will always have a mayor. And, you know, as elections come and go, the members may change. And so that, I guess, in the spirit of continuity and perpetuity, I suspect it should sit with the mayor as the lead person, and then the mayor also has a budget, and so it doesn't come out of any particular
I knew this was
council's
going to
budget.
somehow come out of my budget.
Say again? I'm sorry? Okay. Whereas the mayor has a budget that's a little bit broader and more robust than the members. I would just recommend that as opposed to be a member, it would be the mayor that's the lead person, and the mayor does the delegating, and the mayor pays the fee. That would be my recommendation.
The mayor's office pays the fee.
Yeah.
The mayor is not paying the $240. Actually, I was gonna mention, just in terms of the fee too, that needs to be clarified a little bit, because if you read the first ordered, the city council designate a city councilor to coordinate the registration, and then that the city council authorized this designee to pay the $240. That would imply that if you were the designee, you would be paying the $240. It should say comes out of the city council budget. But if the amendment is to have our office do it, I'd be happy to do that and work with folks about who wants to be on it and who doesn't. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to my colleague, thank you for that suggestion. I'm certainly very open to it. That's why I put this before the body, so we could deliberate and decide how to how to best do this. So I'm happy to consider that approach as well.
Okay. So why don't we walk through your amendments, Counselor, and then we can amend the orders. Do you have?
Yeah, so the first one would be to add.
Right, so the first is to add Vice Mayor Devereaux. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And did you have another? That was. Designate yourself. Okay, so I would suggest that in the first order that we amend to say that the City Council designate the mayor to coordinate the registering of up to 8 councilors as voters, and be it further ordered that that the mayor's office pay the $240 fee.
There's a council budget too.
It's $240. We got it. He balances the books. Are folks okay with that? Okay. So on those two amendments, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the final slight wrinkle is that we have 9 members, but we can only register 8 voters. So if my colleagues, it looks like.
I'll demur so that my other colleagues could participate.
I was looking for the not it symbol from somebody, but I didn't see it. Okay, so Councilor, so there you go. If there are any other councilors who don't feel that they want to take on this responsibility, please just email me by the end of the week, and then I'll make the official announcement next week.
Just procedurally, we have until September to register our voters. So we have to register the body by March 29th, and then we can register individual voters until September.
Yeah,
So.
I'd like to get it done and off the plate.
Oh, no.
So otherwise, if I don't hear from anybody by the end of the week, it'll be the 8 of us, excluding Councilor Simmons. All right, on the order as amended, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to committee reports. We took care of number 1 already. Pleasure of the council. Anyone like to pull any committee reports to discuss?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull number 2, thank you.
On 3, accepting the report and placing 3 and 4 on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Back to number 2. A communication was received from Donna P. Lopez, City Clerk, transmitting a report from Councilor Dennis J. Carlone and Councilor Craig A. Kelly, co-chairs of the Ordinance Committee, for a public hearing held February 5th, 2019, to discuss the petition filed by the City Council to amend the zoning ordinances in Article 5.000 as it relates to rainwater and flat roofs. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I understand the Ordinance Committee and the Planning Board were not supportive of the idea to incentivize people to modify certain types of flat roofs to cut down on emissions and move rainwater out of the central drain in the NWRA system, which I find unfortunate. But I think the bigger challenge we need to face is some changes are going to be really, really big, like the Brown petition was really, really big, and we couldn't quite figure out what do you do with a really, really, really big thing. This one was really, 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 really small, and for a variety of reasons, it's not going forward. As we try and figure out, and I think Councillor Mellon, or maybe it was Siddiqui, was talking about the challenge of getting things done. As we try and look at other things, whether they come out of Envision or whatever, I think we need to figure out a way to put some stuff, little stuff, in one big bucket and move that big bucket forward, whatever that, or multiple big buckets. This was an immense amount of time, city staff, the planning board, and so forth, for a tiny, tiny little thing. And I think it's indicative that that approach will not address our more major problems. Thank you.
Thank you. On accepting the report and placing on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. And the ayes have it. There are no communications and reports from city officers. There are no roundtable minutes, late orders, and resolutions. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Mayor. We have two late resolutions. We have a resolution on the death of Manuel Costa Bedungas submitted by Councilor Toomey, and a resolution on the death of John J. Courtney Jr. submitted by Councilor Toomey.
On the resolutions making unanimous upon adoption, all those, you want to speak to one? No. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any late orders? Oh, you have a late resolution? Councilor Simmons.
I can write it down. It's just on the death of Robert Scott.
On the resolution, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Are there late orders? Yes. Okay, we need a roll call suspension to hear late orders. Roll call.
On suspension, Councilor Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly. Councilor Mallon.
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Councilor Toomey. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And suspension prevails on an affirmative vote with 8 in favor, 1 recorded in the negative. And
Madam Clerk.
our late policy order is that the mayor is requested to reschedule the roundtable working meeting for members of the city council and the school committee, which was canceled due to inclement weather on the evening of Tuesday, February 12th, to be held on Wednesday, March 13th at 5:30 in the Sullivan Chamber, for the purpose of holding a preliminary discussion on the Cambridge Public School Department budget for the fiscal year 2020, submitted by the mayor.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Okay. Announcements. Real quickly, tomorrow night, there is a roundtable. Let's not get confused about the roundtable with the school committee that we just passed. Tomorrow night, there is a roundtable here to discuss the Tobin School. And also, I think we're getting an update on Cambridge Street, too, I think. So that is tomorrow night here. Thursday night, at the 28th, is the second open mic night, recognizing Black History Month, and that will be here at 6 o'clock. We have a number of people signed up to participate. Councilor Siddiqui is going to sing.
Are you serious?
I don't know if that, I don't know if that's true or not.
It was supposed to be a surprise.
But it should be. It was a great event last year and should be a great event again this year. Any other announcements? Seeing none. On a motion by Councilor Toomey to adjourn, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.